All right, welcome to, let's see, I think it's the 10th. Is it the 10th episode of the Warrior Philosopher podcast? I'm going to double check really quick. But I believe, no, it's the 9th. We are in the 9th
You're off by one.
the 9th episode of the Warrior Philosopher podcast. I'm joined by Jared Stewart, good friend of mine, and
Good to meet you.
And also, good to meet me, shut up. And also Gimli, who is,
Hi,
Gimli, sit, hey,
Hey,
sit. We're making the video.
Sit.
As you can see here, Gimli is being a rabble-rouser as usual. Today we're going to be discussing order and chaos in regards to maintaining the most efficient society, all the way from the overall state down to the individual, and how you have to balance both aspects in your life to be able to, I guess, sort of achieve true fulfillment, right?
I would say to create the most stable society.
Sure.
That's the way
from a societal perspective.
Yeah. It depends on at what level you're looking at the structure, right? Because if you just look at it from the societal level, you need to balance it so that you don't completely suppress your citizens, your population.
Right.
But you also need to balance it so you have enough order and enough structure and enough peace or perceived safety.
Sure.
So that people just aren't going to be running wild. Just it's not chaos in the streets.
Right.
Essentially.
The way I see it is, and throughout this this episode, I'm going to be referencing Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the Dionysian and the Apollonian. Essentially, the Dionysian is the more chaotic nature of man. It's our animalistic urges. Sort of from an evolutionary perspective. Obviously we are animals. We crave specific things, and we desire specific things that are necessary for our basic survival. So food, shelter, and procreation.
And then, you could get into like Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Sure,
but those are the basic ones. Right?
Yeah, and
it's more simple.
Yeah. So, but that would be like experiencing these sort of physical pleasures, for example, like take sex or partying, like drinking.
Yep.
Like it's called Dionysian for a reason. So Dionysus, obviously.
Was it she or he? He?
Yeah.
I forget. I forget if it's a male or female because he was the god of wine, parties. I feel like there's another one there.
He was also he wasn't. I wouldn't call him the patron god of satyrs, but he
satyrs
was
were related to him though.
Yeah, satyr, like if any of you have watched read like the Percy Jackson series growing up, you'll remember that Grover and the satyrs all directly answered to Dionysus in the book. I don't know if people will understand that reference, but and the reason why satyrs sort of serve Dionysus is because the satyr in Greek mythology sort of represents the man's connection to his animalistic roots and hence animalistic urges. The satyr is half man.
It's like a visual representation, right? It's a half goat, half human.
Right. But then there's a sort of not mental, but there's an actual there's the part of the myth is not just the visual representation, but what that represents on a deeper level.
Yeah, I mean they just used the visual side to reinforce that.
Exactly.
It's pretty common in mythology and generals.
Right.
Folk tales and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty common to utilize a visual aspect, especially if you're putting it in plays, because the Greeks were so big on all their plays and big performances. So they added a visual aspect to supplement that underlying meaning. Yeah, that's about it.
Essentially. But yeah, that basically, when I talk about chaos, I think it's important to sort of think of chaos as in the state of nature. Nature is chaotic. You're kind of going based off.
Yeah, there's no guarantee that you will have anything.
No.
There's no guarantee that you will have food, water, shelter, pleasure, even that you will live through one night.
Right.
Even that
Nothing's
you will
guaranteed.
sleep and you won't be woken by wolves eating your entire family. Like there's no guarantees. There's nothing.
And because of that, that's where overindulgence comes from. It comes from the fact that nothing's guaranteed. So food's not guaranteed. Procreation, so sex is not guaranteed. Shelter is not guaranteed. So, people overeat. They'll drink a lot of, they'll drink a lot. They'll consume a lot. They'll be promiscuous in regards to sexual activity. In terms of shelter, we like to hoard.
Yep.
Like we like to buy nice things. It all comes from a basic evolutionary
humans
drive.
will take any chance they can get to get any of these basic like 4 things, and as much as possible.
Yeah.
They will try and hoard or acquire or experience as much of these 4 things. It varies on the individual what that is. Like I'm not big into food.
Yeah, you're kind of skinny.
I am kind of skinny, but I fucking drinking.
Yeah, drinking some tea right now, some caffeine.
You'll give me
slight
drink,
caffeine. It's only green tea.
I don't eat a lot, but
Yeah.
if you put food in front of me, I'll fucking, it's gone. You know, I put a drink in front of me, it's gone. Like everybody has this to some extent, unless you're a very, very self-disciplined person.
Right. And like, I mean, just look at. Should we look at developed countries, right? Especially the United States is a good example. When you become a consumer society, you see like obesity is really high. And that's because so here's an important distinction I'd like to make between modern man and sort of prehistoric man. So before like civilization,
hunter gatherers.
Yeah.
Right, like hunter gatherer man versus post agriculture, really.
Right.
And then post industry, which is
exactly
an even bigger difference.
And the funny thing, or not funny, but the interesting thing. So if we look at geological records or whatever, humanity has existed, let's say 300,000 years, about roughly.
Like the most recent fossil record shit I've seen, like recently, that put it all the way back to like a million. Really? 1 million years. Like 500,000.
Is that like the last evolution of humans though, or is that like
that's like the guess that around when we split off from the common ancestor with Neanderthals.
Gotcha.
Which I believe is theorized to be Homo erectus. I could be wrong. It might be Homo habilis.
Well, we're Homo erectus now.
No. We are Homo sapien. So we are technically Homo sapien.
So Homo erectus is the first.
It's like our prior ancestor, but I think
that's like branching off.
They came from Homo habilis. Homo habilis came from. There's like a whole line of them.
Gotcha.
But they all go back to the great apes, which was like a.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's our common. The great apes is our common ancestor with chimps, gorillas, bonobos, etc.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I'm not as well versed on the actual like terminology.
I'm a huge fucking nerd.
That's good. That'll work out for this. But even 300,000 million years, that's a long time. And agricultural revolution took place 12,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So
at the earliest.
Right. So the distinction I'm making here between the different kinds of men is for most of our history, like the vast majority, like over 90%, we were hunter and gatherers. So just look at the biological nature of that. We were meant. So if you look at Africa, right? The normal shape of like an African tribesman, that is how we originally were meant to be. Lean but muscular.
Lean, but they're actually pretty jacked.
Yeah, but they're skinny, but everything is tight. Everything's a tight muscle.
They can run for
a long time.
Hours. No sweating, no tiring. They barely need water.
And some of them aren't even wearing shoes.
No,
because their feet are so hard.
Most of
them
don't
ground.
even need shoes. Actually, what was really fascination that I have seen is if you look at especially hunter-gatherers who are native to South America in the jungles, their feet are actually splayed.
What does that mean?
Their toes are splayed.
What is splayed?
So like, your toes are like this?
Yeah.
Your toes are like that. Ah. Some of them are even like a little bit more.
So you can like climb a little better.
So you can not just climb, but you can grip onto rocks, roots. Yeah. And you're more used to walking, running, climbing across very uneven, dangerous surfaces.
That's interesting. I didn't think of it because I guess if you're in a more jungle environment, that'd probably be better. Whereas if you're more a savanna environment, you don't want splayed toes. Because
you might want the more typical.
Yeah, because you're going to be like going off of hard surfaces.
Flat, apart from like potholes.
Right. But anyway, so like African tribesmen, that is how most of our evolutionary history.
That's where we came from, right? That's the idea. We came from
like cardiovascular
sub-Saharan Africa.
Right.
And we're just like cardio gods.
Yeah. But we're not like one of the funny things I've seen is like the Liver King saying like this is the natural no one looked
we're
like
not jacked
not like that. We're not meant to be jacked, but once you have the agricultural revolution and you don't need to constantly because like in a hunter-gatherer society you're constantly running to catch your food, you're trying to hunt, you're constantly moving, but once you have the agricultural revolution and you're sort of fixed in a specific location, physical strength over cardiovascular traits are more necessary because you're carrying heavy tools.
Yes.
You're probably building up the town as well.
It's, I believe so. Like, the term for what you're talking about is what happened after the agricultural revolution was the division of labor, the basic division of labor.
Yes.
Because now, one person or not even 5 people could produce your entire town's food source for the whole year.
Right.
Through winter.
Yeah.
Right? This leaves another 60 to 75 people to do what? Build houses, fucking...
Make clothes.
Yeah. Make better weapons.
Yeah.
Make better weapons, you know? And then you get into... Then they just start making culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you get that
Yeah,
higher
arts.
echelon of
Yeah.
jobs. You have arts, you have shamans, you have all this shit.
Right. And, you know, this wouldn't be possible if you didn't have the sort of... Because once you're able to feed your population more easily, then you don't have to constantly be working towards, you know, providing the basic subsistence. Because, like, when you're hunting, first of all, it's not guaranteed. Different seasons, you're going to have better hunts than others. But generally speaking, apart from, like, famines and droughts, generally, agriculture is a more stable way to feed your people.
It's definitely more stable.
Oh, yeah,
because
100%.
Especially since you don't have to move.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're a herder, like the
And then,
steppe peoples.
then you have, like...
The steppe peoples will move around.
Right.
But they still stay kind of in the same area. But if you're a hunter-gatherer, you're going to follow the food.
Yeah.
You're going to go wherever that goes. So
Well, yeah, the Native Americans went all the way to the Americas.
Everywhere. And then even when they were within North America, they went across
Totally south.
whole miles and
Isn't
miles
that so
of
crazy that
territory.
they went... Because, like, Pangaea had already split, so they had gone all the way through the Bering Strait, all the way down to literally this where Argentina is today.
And
Isn't that crazy?
We're not even sure really when they crossed.
Right. But it's crazy to think
But it's crazy that somebody crossed that, because at that time, the earliest estimate I've seen of when they crossed was still like 12,000 years ago. At that time, 12,000 years ago, that was just ice out there. It was ice for miles.
That's how they were able to cross.
Because it was a land bridge.
Yeah.
Because of the ice reduced the sea level so much.
Gotcha. So there was actual land.
But to get there, I mean, they're traveling over glacier sheets.
Right.
Just sheets of ice.
Mm-hmm.
Probably hunting
mammoths,
whatever was out there. Literally anything they could.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, they all kind of split off, and you have a bunch of Inuit peoples. And then I actually don't know their lineage.
The Inuits?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well,
I don't know where their genetic lineage comes from.
Yeah, that's a good question. I do think it probably comes from that same original migration, but yeah, I would look into that as well.
But they had to cross that whole strait, that whole section of land, just chasing food.
Yeah.
And then they probably moved there because there wasn't enough food from wherever they came from.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same, like, you can, like, pop it all the way back to, like, why did humans leave Africa in the first place?
Sure.
Well, not enough food.
That's part of it. And also, when you look at the Ice Age, because what people don't realize about the Ice Age is the whole Earth wasn't
it was
affected. It's individual, lines, basically.
Like, if you go... If you could picture, like, America on a map, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, like, the southern-ish end of Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
If you know where that is.
Yeah.
Fucking everything north of that's, like, ice.
Mm-hmm.
But everything south of that, until you get to, like, Peru, is green.
Right.
Super green,
right.
Actually. Because it was able to support serious megafauna.
Mm-hmm.
All over the world, there was intense amounts of megafauna, especially in North America.
Gotcha.
And then they all died out. And the only megafauna really left on Earth all come from Africa.
Mm. What's megafauna exactly?
So megafauna is a term that means just, like, pretty much just big animal. Like, really big animal. So,
gotcha. Like elephants,
rhinos, giraffe.
Gotcha.
Arguably, you could even argue lions are a sense of megafauna.
But then you have jaguars. You have jaguars in South America. They're pretty big.
But again, they were in that small band that probably would have survived whatever, like the end of the Ice Age.
What's interesting to think, so the reason why Neanderthals developed so genetically different from humans is because of the Ice Age. So they were trapped in a specific area, so there was no interaction with humans. Because they're still close enough related to us that we can reproduce with them.
Most Europeans have
Neanderthal genetics.
Yeah. If you have, I think it's like green eyes, maybe even blue too, but I think
red hair is.
If you have red hair and you're very white, you probably have a decent amount of Neanderthal DNA. I mean, it's only like 2%.
But that's a
which
lot.
Doesn't sound like a lot.
But it is a lot.
I mean, statistically, pretty much every European has at least like 0.5% or a quarter. I think even I have like a quarter or some shit of Neanderthal.
Probably. Yeah. Who knows? But a good amount compared to
essentially
what we
we
might
outbred
think.
them.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that is what we did. Yeah.
That's the basic. Because another thing that I've heard, again, this is like coming from scientific community, so like it can be wrong.
Yeah.
But I've seen some good supporting evidence for it. Is that Neanderthals, one of the reasons we outcompeted them is because they lived in smaller social groups than we did.
Gotcha.
Humans lived in larger social groups, and one of the reasons we think that is, one, we just see like smaller groups of them together as opposed to humans.
Mm-hmm.
We also think that humans would have been forced to live in larger groups because we are physically more fragile than Neanderthals.
Right.
They have denser, thicker bones and better attachment points for their muscles.
Right.
So the reasoning is that they were able to use a bit more brute force and not have to rely so much on numbers and technology.
Right.
We were forced to, or else we would have just been bodied by woolly rhinos and whatever else we were hunting.
Right. And, before we move on from that, from what I've heard, Neanderthals, so, how, the kind of conception is that, Neanderthals were dumb. From what I understand, they were actually, in some ways, smarter than the humans.
They were at least as smart, as intelligent.
Right.
Very easily as intelligent.
But definitely not, dumb.
Because, absolutely not. Because we see the same level, almost the same exact level of technology.
Right.
We all pretty much had the same weapons at the time. Again, really the only, because they also have, cultural markings. Like jewelry, for one. We know they had jewelry. We've seen. They also had burial rituals.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Which was that was a really cool find. Because we knew ancient humans had burial rituals, but to see that they also had burial rituals.
That kind of predates it even further back.
Yeah, it was older.
Yeah.
We're kind of getting on a tangent again.
Yeah, a little bit of a tangent. I'll have to timestamp this. So 16 minutes in? Okay.
16 minutes in?
Sure. But how do we even get to that?
We were talking about hunter-gatherers and the state of nature.
Sure.
Anyway, state of nature, nothing is guaranteed. You can't rely on anything being there except for what your prior knowledge has taught you. Right. Which is why, the tribal shaman was such a big deal. Because the fundamental job of the shaman, not just to, heal people or to try and help people get better if they're sick, it's also to take all the stories and all the knowledge from the last shaman, memorize everything.
Right, because they had no writing system.
Because they didn't have a writing system. And then tell people, just relay the wisdom when people needed answers for something. Hey, where's that one plant that we need to do this one thing? It tastes good. And it tastes kind of sweet. He's like, oh yeah, you're gonna find it at the foot of this kind of tree after this kind of storm. It's shit like
Hopefully.
That. Hopefully.
It's oh wait, that was the poison one. No, it's funny that you mentioned stuff like that. So you look at the early tradition of sort of an intellectual class, let's call it, the priestly classes. So for example, in ancient Mesopotamia, or Egypt, I forget which one it was, but essentially in that general region, the priestly class would they would also be focused on studying astronomy to the best of their abilities.
Oh my god, there was something.
I can elaborate. Maybe it'll jog your memory.
No, there was this interesting find I heard about. I cannot for the life of me remember where it was. It was either Egypt or Mesopotamia. Sure. Egypt or the Fertile Crescent, right? Yeah. They found in their temples they had reflection pools to look at the sky.
Gotcha.
So the whole function, they just fill it with water, and they'd sit there and watch.
Interesting.
And just watch the movements of the stars over time.
That makes it easier than just looking at it.
Yep. It's way easier than doing that.
Yeah.
And then this way they can also point at things.
They could probably put a stick. Yeah, you put a stick in the. Yeah.
They can mark things.
I didn't know that. Yeah. Well, the reason I mentioned that is because by studying the moon, for example, you can study so the great floods would happen, and then you have the floodplains.
Oh, in Egypt, yeah.
Well,
the Nile flood.
I believe in Mesopotamia as well.
The fertile, it also flooded. Yeah. The Euphrates and Tigris also would flood.
Right, but by looking at the moon, you can predict that.
Yes.
And what this priestly class would do is they would pretend to have magic or understand the gods because they would learn.
Well, because it seems to be fair.
But they knew it wasn't.
They knew it was? You said they knew that it wasn't?
They knew it wasn't. Because what they did was, and this is from a book, Evolution of Civilizations by Carrick Quigley, so this is his interpretation. They would look at the moon, and they would, they would start to think, okay, when this happens, this is when the floods come. This is what signals the coming of the flood. So what we're going to do is we're going to, manipulate that to say, this is, the gods, you can kind of interpret that, oh, the gods are happy now. We need to make more sacrifice, or give me more money. Give me more money. So that I can, or give me more sacrifices.
Give me more food.
Yeah,
sacrifices.
So I can sacrifice, right? Food. So I can sacrifice to the gods to make them happier. And then when you see it, the rain's about to come, you're like, all right, that was sufficient. You have sacrificed enough. The floods will come now. And they could predict it, and they could use that to sort of socially engineer society to manipulate them. And it's funny because you see that today too. People with more knowledge that know more than the ignorant person can convince the ignorant person that, okay, well, if you do this, this will happen. But then, if you do this, becomes helping me out, furthering my influence.
Something I wonder is you think that...
Gimli, be quiet.
You think that these traditions and these skills,
yeah,
like the first kind of groups of people who caught on to this...
Gimli, come here.
You think they started that not as a means of control, but because they realized how the fuck were they going to explain this to anybody?
That's a good question, because so people will make that argument when it comes to religion. So, like, I think I've mentioned before in some of our conversation, the Jewish philosopher Maimonides made this argument in regards to Moses.
Really?
Like, this was the way that Moses could sort of further his what he believed to be right or wrong, his moral, this is how he could justify his moral foundation.
Interesting.
Through the Ten Commandments, right? And by saying God gave them to me, right? So so that's a good question, because some people will argue, for example, like religion came out of really smart people who kind of, through reasoning, decided, okay, this is right and this is wrong, but people aren't going to take my word for it, so I have to give divine legitimacy.
It's not just that, like, how do you explain that because the moon is a certain shape, that means that the river's going to flood?
Right, because the average
How do you explain that to a dude who all he does all day is watch sheep?
Yeah. No, it's a good point to make.
Keep him alive, right?
But then it's like, there could have been a little bit of both of that. It could have been,
I feel like it was definitely both. Like, like it could have started as like a good intention, like we just need them to like know that this is gonna happen, and then someone went, we could
use this to get us more money.
We can ramp it up a little.
Yeah.
We could turn this.
This is why I get to have the temple virgins,
exactly
come to my temple.
Oh my god, is it Babylon?
For what?
That had that.
What?
The temple prostitutes.
Well, I mean, a lot of them
have had that.
Yeah, the priest knew how to manipulate social engineer. Hey, think about it this way. It still happens today. Look at all these cults, like the Waco cult. That guy was sleeping with all the wives in that cult. It happens all the time.
How that man got away with that?
Dude, he wasn't even. He was ugly. And he was weird. That's what shows you, if you can convince people that you have some sort of gift, God's gift, then, Here, Gimli.
No. All right. You're distracting me, Gimli.
Yeah. Stay there. I'll keep my hand here so it doesn't come up. But if you can convince that you have some sort of divine legitimacy.
Yeah, that you have some gift of divine legitimacy. People really love falling for divine legitimacy.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep my arm here so he doesn't come through.
The other big one is you have some secret knowledge.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think of like, how like some people say like, we already discovered a cure for cancer, but it wouldn't be profitable. Like, why would you tell? Like, chemo's expensive. Yeah, why would we come up with a cure for cancer?
I love that little conspiracy theory that is just like,
whether it's
maybe
true,
we already have it.
Yeah, but it's like self-help books. Well, here's the thing, like self-help books. Why would you write a good self-help book? If you wrote a good self-help book, they're never going to need another self-help book. So you write a decent self-help book, but not one's going to solve all the problems, so they buy more self-help books. No, I'm serious.
Right? No, I know. I like the reasoning. That's funny. I feel like I've heard that about something else. Well, I heard that same reasoning applied to the entire medical field.
Yeah, therapists. Why would you need a therapist if they actually solve your problems? Therapists don't want you to get better.
Why would
just over-medicate you?
Why would they actually fix you?
Yeah.
If they know that you're just going to keep paying money to come see them.
Exactly.
I saw a great meme about this the other day. It was like when a therapist sees any woman with colored hair, like blue hair or pink hair, walk in, all they see is fucking dollar signs. That's all they see.
Makes sense, though.
It's pretty good. I don't know what memes, but I found it very amusing at the time.
Yeah, no, I get the message behind it, if you will.
It's the same thing. It's like any industry that seeks to help you, but it's supposed to use profit. Take everything they say with a grain of salt.
Right. I'm just writing down some timestamps for later. But
now,
back to the overall. So what we're trying to describe is, we're trying to talk about sort of, and essentially, I guess what I'm getting at is, for most of our history, our lifestyle revolved around hunting and gathering. Therefore, the entire essence of our biology is, you have to expend a certain amount of energy to be able to get this certain amount of reward to survive.
And you never know when you're gonna eat next.
Right, so that moderation isn't built into our DNA.
Not at all.
There is no moderation because we, like you said, if we don't know when our next meal is gonna come, what are you gonna do?
Just eat.
Yeah.
I'm gonna eat whatever I can fucking get.
Yeah.
Roots, grass.
So that's why people are obese, because there's nothing in our DNA that tells us to be temperate. It's only our minds, right?
Yep.
So our minds, we can rationalize, okay, I gotta eat healthy, but there's no instinct within us that says I should eat healthy. Now, if you eat really shittily, then you might feel like shit. That's
but eventually your body gets so used to
eating
like shit.
Like fat people, if they start eating vegetables, they will feel sick.
Well, you also don't even realize what, like, you feel like shit all the time.
Yeah.
But you don't realize why.
Sure.
You just think, well, I just wake up with brain fog. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you get too used to it, you're just like, okay, this is normal.
This is normal, right? You forget what's not normal.
Yeah. So that's why you have people who are obese. If you want to look at like moral, so here's one of my explanations for like moral decadence. I think moral decadence in a society comes from this evolutionary drive towards overconsumption. Like, we do not understand moderation. So take sex, for example. In the state of nature, especially for a man, he wants to spread his genetic code to as many women as possible. So he's going to try to have sex as much as possible, right? So
yes, essentially.
Yeah, so if a man has an opportunity, he's going to have sex. Therefore, in today's society, and then because procreation isn't the main focus of sex anymore today, like it's mainly done for pleasure.
Yeah.
Now women are also sort of in on this, so it's men and women now. The original basic necessity is procreation, but now it turns into sex for pleasure. Therefore, people are more prone to be promiscuous, because in the state of nature, it's not so easy to get a mate. People die. Like, it's common at one point in time for like men to have 3 different wives because they all died in childbirth.
Yeah. Super common. It was also just super common for the kid to die in childbirth.
Yeah, that
but
too.
If the kid died in childbirth, the mom was almost definitely going to die in childbirth.
Yeah, at that time.
At that time, it's really hard to like pull a dead baby out of you.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, tragically, that's just how it was.
Well, like, think C-sections.
And
C-sections were a thing in the past, but whenever they did a C-section, obviously the woman would die.
You want to know one of the biggest reasons the population starts booming in industrialized countries?
Yeah.
It's because the kids stop dying.
Huh.
The kids and the moms stop dying of childbirth.
That makes sense. Crazy
now,
concept.
And then you have cultures that are more used to like half their kids dying.
Mm-hmm.
So you see this when you look at just blanked a little bit. You see this when you look at England during the Industrial Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Their families would, like, especially the poor families, would have 10 kids, right? But 5 of them would fucking die before they were even like 3 or 4,
right?
Because there was so many diseases. That their diet was atrocious.
Oh yeah.
The living standards were also atrocious.
Oh, look at how close they lived together. Like, their poop was literally, they had no irrigation system, no plumbing, nothing.
And then not just that, but like they're pumping an insane amount of just coal.
Yeah. So
just into their air.
Their lungs are going to be horrible.
Their lungs are horrible. All the kids are working once they hit like 4. As soon as they can pick up a pickaxe.
No, it's because they can fit in the small little areas.
Exactly. They're perfect. But child mortality rate was really, really high.
Yeah.
But as medicine got better and better and better, and these kids stopped dying, all of a sudden their population shot up, and it took them several decades for their culture to catch up. And now, what's the mean? It's 1.5 kids.
Yeah, it's probably less than that. Some parts of Europe.
Well, England specifically.
Oh, okay,
it's like 1.5 to 2 kids.
Gotcha.
And America, same thing happened there. And the same thing slowly is happening in every other industrialized.
Here's is that a specific statistic? 1.5.
I know it is for America.
Because
specifically 1.5.
I bet it's
the average.
I bet it's lower if you look at the So if you look at immigrant communities, a lot of them have.
You actually break it out. It's actually lower.
It's lower because immigrant communities are coming from more of that type of.
They culturally will continue to have kids.
Right, because take India for example. Even though their medicine's probably good enough that most of the kids don't die.
But culture just takes time.
Yeah, exactly.
It takes a lot of time, and they had such a dense population to begin with that it's still child mortality is still reasonably high, especially in the poor communities.
Right. So when you take a family from a developing country, they come to the U.S. The concept of only having a few kids isn't it's not ingrained in them, especially with education. Once women become educated, they generally have less kids, if any kids at all. And most of the women coming from developing countries, whether it's because they weren't allowed to get an education or if it's because just their socioeconomic status, they're not as educated as women who are born here and think, okay, well, I'm gonna go get a job. I'm not just gonna have you know what I mean?
Yep.
So a lot of different factors.
Yeah, there's a really big difference between first generation immigrants child rate to second generation immigrants child rate.
Yeah.
So the actual.
It's a child rate.
Yeah, child rate. Like rate of childbirth. Like how many kids they have. Sorry, I'll be more specific. So the actual immigrant couple, let's say, themselves, who come here, they will have, for example, like, say 7 kids. Yeah. Which nowadays is like
crazy amount. Yeah.
Absurd. Even to attempt to have that many kids. Mm-hmm. And then their kids will only have like 2 kids. Sure. Because they're raised here. Yeah. And then their kids will only have like 1 or 2. Mm-hmm. And then their kids' kids will only have 1 or 2, and so on and so on and so on and so forth, down until they're just meaned out. Mm-hmm. Mean isn't like the mathematical. Like they're just a member of the statistically average. And now they have 1.5 to 2 kids. But you could break it out even further because I would argue that most people only have 1 kid. Yeah. And the families that do have more than 1 probably have 3.
Yeah, it's a big gap. It's either you have no kids or 1 kid, or you have a lot of kids.
And in my experience at all, I don't know any good statistics. Take this with a grain of salt, right? Sure. It's just my experience. Yeah. But the typical cultural divide is religion.
Generally, yeah.
If you're raised really religious, you're more likely to have more kids.
That's tied to economics as well, though.
That is.
Because I think that because generally speaking, people that come from developing countries are generally more religious. Mm-hmm. They have, I mean, there's a variety of reasons to back this up. Like you look at education. Like generally, people have more of an access to education. You know, and education is especially today is very secular. So you're more likely to probably end up not being religious. You know. Yeah. And even this is true even in like non-secular educations. Like I went to Catholic school pretty much my whole life, and most of the people that I went to school with were not incredibly religious. You know, so it's interesting. But anyway, to get back to the main point, which we keep straying from.
We do. Well, because there's a lot of tangents to go off of this. Because the way I look at it, at least, this relates to like every single aspect of a society. Yeah. Is how they're balancing this out.
Absolutely. But anyway, back to like sort of chaos. Right, the Dionysian aspect of humanity, it is a thing. People are going to inherently, if they have the ability to, overindulge in these basic necessities, which is why in a developed country like the United States or most of the Western world, we have easy access to food, easy access to shelter overall, easy access to like if generally speaking, like if someone wants to be sexually promiscuous, it's not that hard. There's plenty of options, you know.
Yeah, I mean we have what like. Probably nearly half a dozen different applications you can just get on your phone. That the whole function is just to have sex with people. Right.
So it's not like in the past where if you grew up in a small hamlet, you know, there's not a lot of opportunities. So it's just like when you have the opportunity to overindulge in these basic necessities, generally because humans don't have it in their DNA to be temperate and moderate those urges, they're going to act on them. Therefore, they're going to eat too much, potentially have too much sex, and buy too many things because they're going to value possession because, you know, like we said, shelter, right? That's having possessions, essentially.
I think it also just comes back to the very... Humans have a very basic... Pretty much at least every person I've ever interacted with has a very basic understanding that having more things... Or rather that... I'll start from the very basic. Sure. Things equate to value. Yeah. Even if it's just your personal value for that thing. So if you have more of those things that you value, you have more value. And that means, for whatever reason in our heads, we're better.
I think that's a function of, like, liberal democracy, where you have... So. Well, why not? Because
why does the chief always want everything?
So that's one person, though. That's the person with the most power. So I think the possessions... No, here's the difference, right? The difference I'm going to delineate is the chief with the most things. That is a reflection of his power rather than like individual value. Every person in this country who has a new iPhone or a new PS5, they don't feel powerful because they have a PS5 or a new iPhone. They get comfort from it. That's a good point. And example doesn't work. And it's like success.
I would then, I think that was a poor example I used. I would then more relate it to territory. I would say having things that has value to you equates back to that similar concept.
That could be rooted from that.
Controlling territory. Or controlling space.
Yes, I would agree with that. So it comes from that, but it isn't. It doesn't have the same...
No, it's like grown. It's like a fucking... It's a mutant growth of that.
Okay, I see where you're coming from now. It's like kind of like...
I'm not saying it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah. I think a good example might be like in relation to sex. Like someone who watches... Like if you watch porn, you're not going to be able to delineate that
your
porn
brain can't. No.
Yeah, your brain's gonna
Your
think
brain
that's sex.
literally thinks that you're watching other humans have sex.
Or that you're having sex.
Yeah.
Right. It depends, right? But the point is that your brain can't delineate reality from the virtual world.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, you are getting the same amount of dopamine that you're going to get from having sex, but then you're not really having sex. So your reality doesn't change.
No.
But you get all that dopamine. So your brain's dopamine regulators get all fucked up because you're getting dopamine, but your actual real situation's not changing.
It messes with the baseline.
Yes.
Neurological baseline.
Yeah, so you're going to go numb to pleasure.
Eventually, yes.
Mm-hmm. And the same thing with possessions, right? Because it's like you said, it's kind of rooted in this ability to control. So I don't know exactly if that's the correct...
Control or to own? Yes
and no, because like here's why I think it is. Because I think if we use power specifically, and you talk about powerful people, then I think that's a function of power. But I don't think possessions are necessarily a function of power. I think it's a function of... Here's what
I would say it's sort of its own thing because you see ownership, the concept of ownership, all the way down to an infant.
Yes, but I don't think it's a power thing. I think it's more of like so.
I'm not saying it's a power thing. I think it's like a status value thing.
Yes,
it's what you value to yourself, and then eventually, as you get older and you start to care about society around you and everyone who lives around you, it's what other people value in that society.
So when talking about the root of that, one thing I'll put forward as a potential root for that. So you take, let's go to the point where you know you know how they say like women enjoy shopping. Why? Because generally they gathered in a society. That's why women like shopping. And why do women like showing like?
I have heard that before.
Has your girlfriend ever showed you like, oh look what I bought today?
No, but she's a shopping addict.
Okay, well.
Well, she's not really. I just.
Sure. Well, mine likes to show me all the things she bought when she gets home. And
she shows me all the things that she wants to buy.
Well, that works too. It's the same idea. Same
idea.
idea.
But I'm like, don't buy those things.
Yeah.
You don't have the money for that.
Okay, but that's the point.
It's the same thing.
It's a biological. It's rooted in biology and in our evolution because you know when the man comes home from hunting, the woman shows him like, look at all the great.
I did.
Yeah, look at all the great mushrooms I picked, the great fruits, whatever.
Fruit, vegetables.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So women enjoy shopping because it's rooted in that evolutionary drive to gather things, and I think by extension, you start off with like foodstuffs. That's a funny word, but that's an actual word. Foodstuffs. No, it's a word.
It is a word. It is a word.
You start off with
I just love the word foodstuffs.
Sure. But then you start off with foodstuffs, but then you get to like, you know, the past 12,000 years where you start building things.
Yep.
So a good structure is going to keep you alive. A good house is going to keep out predators. It's going to keep out other humans. You know, walled city. Why do we... Like, I find walls so cool.
Walled cities?
No, I do. Don't you? You never seen a castle and just that looks cool.
Or oh God. Have you ever been to Italy?
No. I've been to France and I saw this cool ass castle.
So seeing the walled cities from the Renaissance, you know, like the Warring States of Italy.
Yeah.
Seeing those, like, oh God, I think it's Florence. Remember correctly? It's a good example of this. It's a walled city, and they're all star forts, right? They're all like these huge star forts, and for whatever reason.
It's cool, right?
It's just cool. It's cool. That's super cool.
And my contention would be that it's probably cool because somewhere down the line we learned the value of walls to keep out the enemy, to keep out the forces of nature.
I think it's like you could just see the value. It's just basic. Like you could just look at a wall and think, well, I live on that side.
That's my point, right?
Wolves live on that side. Yeah.
I'm safe. It's the safety, right? Like, why do you feel nice and cozy at home? You know, it keeps you warm, etc. So I guess what I'm getting at is the idea of possessions. I think it's rooted in this sort of, you know, it's an extension of shelter and goods in general. And, you know, it does increase, especially once you get into bartering, because I think once you have agriculture, you probably have more bartering because, like, division of labor. So people are producing specific goods.
So, people, instead of everybody having, like, a little bit of everything and maybe specializing in, like, maybe the women specializing in a skill and maybe one or two men specializing who are older men. Yeah. Like, one of them teaches you how to use a bow. One of them was really good with the spear back in the day, so he shows you how to throw a spear and use an addle, right? Yeah. But by and large, everybody was doing the same things. However, once you reach that division of labor, now you have very clear. Well, I farm. That's all I do. Yeah. I herd sheep.
That's all you do.
I grow plants. That's it. Yeah. And then you have another guy who's like, I'm really good at building houses.
Yeah.
Right? So I build everyone's house. Mm-hmm. That's what I do. I'll repair your house after I build it.
And you give
right?
me
goods. Some of your cheese.
Yes.
Or like you'll go catch some deer for me the next time you're out, right? Whatever
catch
it
and
is.
kill them, hopefully, not just... Here, I brought you a live deer.
Kill it. I don't know. I always assume whenever you're catching an animal, you're
Sure.
ending it, but
maybe. But yeah.
Except for maybe like dogs.
Sure, yeah. Love dogs.
I love dogs.
Oh, Gimli's being annoying. I might have to hunt him. But no, but like, so once you're starting to like give equal goods or services, then you know you're the goods that you do have, that gives you social value, because you can, if you have good goods, if you produce the best goods, you can get the best services back, or the best goods that you don't have. You know, so it's like possessions are all rooted in some sort of evolutionary function. It
becomes an extension of our basic concept of social standing and hierarchies. Just in the first place, it becomes the basic like a really good example of that is social hierarchies form around some really weird stuff.
Yeah.
Humans. There's a tribe in Africa. I don't remember the name of them. Sorry. Real tribe.
Yeah.
Their hierarchy is based on the size of your belly. That's so all the males just like huge, and the chief obviously has the biggest.
Oh hell yeah!
Right, so
he's better.
Super fat, but not fat because they're all like muscular.
Yeah.
But his stomach is just like enormous.
He's like the bodybuilders after they stop taking steroids.
Exactly. He's got their word gut.
Yeah.
But that is a more primitive version of I have the newest iPhone.
I think that's a more primitive version of health. Because like
you think that's more primitive of health?
Because you know how like in certain cultures having a really fat wife was considered a sign of status, because if you had a fat wife, that means that her father.
Good.
Yeah, no, it does.
She was eating good.
And you know, in some places in Africa, they'll literally feed the women tons of milk.
Yeah.
Like just milk, so they get really fat, because you know because like
there used to be specific diets that your like doctor in more recent times, but even back to the shaman would tell you to eat
high calorie things.
They'd tell you to eat certain foods if you thought you were pregnant or if you wanted to have kids.
Yeah, high calorie foods. Yeah. Well, here's an interesting thing. Why do people like thick? All right, this is getting a little bit modern, but like thickness.
Well, then now we're just getting into like hip.
No, it's not just. Yes, that's part of it, but
also like fat deposits.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the fact that women, one, are meant to have more fat than males, and two, more fat is healthier for them.
Yeah, it means that
and healthier for their kid.
Exactly. So like, why is there a certain attraction for many men with a thick woman? I know it sounds funny to talk about, but it's because generally being a decent amount of thickness means that, okay, like you said, you have extra fat deposits for the kid. If you have wider hips, that's better, because like in the old days, if you didn't have wide hips, the woman was gonna die, like straight up.
Well, yeah, because this is such a weird scientific fact.
Yeah.
But a human baby's head is almost at the exact limit it can be in ratio to their mom's hips before it just gets stuck.
Right.
Every time. So it's sort of like rolling the dice, unless your woman has really wide hips.
Yeah, so that's why.
So that's why wide hips
exactly
are more valued than narrow hips.
Exactly.
But then, what's also interesting is amongst men, you see the opposite. The narrower hips are more valued. And you know what's interesting about narrower hips? It's better for athletic movement.
Makes sense.
Better for running. Better for climbing. Really fast. Well,
you want to be able to stop yourself.
Stop yourself and
stop.
But it's just the way the muscle attachment points work.
Sure.
Is it lends itself to athleticism.
Yeah. But anyway, all this is rooted in biological. Another tangent.
Our point is
everything's rooted in some biological function.
Almost everything.
Evolutionary function. Yeah.
Right. And if the thing itself doesn't come back to biology, what it represents in your society almost certainly does.
Right. So there we go. I think we've kind of talked about chaos quite well. Chaos essentially, just to summarize it before we go on to the importance of balancing these two things, just to summarize, chaos is the state of nature where survival is not guaranteed. Therefore, experiencing these physical necessities for survival gives you pleasure, because your brain needs you to seek these things out, needs you to seek sex out, to procreate, it needs you to seek food out so that you can survive. Therefore, when you have these things more readily accessible in your society, you overindulge in them, and that's what leads to pleasure. That's what leads to more like hedonistic lifestyles.
Yeah.
And that is the Dionysian, that is chaos.
So then,
as an aspect of it.
What you could wonder, if you're just thinking about this from bare bones logical perspective.
Yeah.
If all this stuff fits into the chaos side, why bother having order? Like, why do you need order?
For the purpose of, like, when you overindulge in something, you create a morally decadent and weak society. Because if you can't order
like,
it,
fundamentally, why do humans seek order? And like in every sense, like, why do we even structure ourselves in hierarchies? Why do we do any of that if we could just have the whole
instinct,
like the free love movement, right? If we could just do that, then why do we even have order in the first place?
Because you're gonna get conquered.
Exactly, because a more structured society is able to more efficiently manage its resources and its people to be, well, more efficient. I use it kind of in its own definition, but to be more efficient. And that efficiency allows them to conquer other tribes, control more territory, get more food, etc., etc., etc.
That's really well put together.
Nah, that was on the fly. I just came up.
No, I was impressed. I like, as soon as you said it, I'm like, that's exactly how I would want to say it. That was really good. But no, it's true, right?
I've spent all this week just like
so I think
thinking about this stuff.
It's interesting. So let's move forward with the balance and order a little bit more. But later on, I do want to touch up on the fact that chaos is important.
Yes,
we'll have to get into why it is.
It's very, very difficult to have a society with literally no chaos.
Yeah.
To have a perfectly ordered and structured society, because humans in and of ourselves, we are a variable.
Right.
We will change, we will ebb and flow. We are chaotic ourselves.
Yeah.
So we cannot have a perfectly ordered, rigid society.
Well, here's one good example, right? So today in the United States and many developed countries, we have a lot of chaos, like freedom to commit chaos when it comes to certain things. So when it comes to sex, when it comes to food, when it comes to like entertainment, you know? But what we don't have freedom when it comes to is violence.
Yes.
And that is just as important as sex, food, and entertainment, because violence is an integral part of the human condition, because we have to be violent. We had to be violent not only to hunt, to protect our families from predators, to fight against other humans. Warfare is
humans are just violent, right?
Yeah, and there's a reason
warfare
for it.
I think what you were going to say was warfare is a fundamental aspect of humans.
Yes, absolutely. And if you don't have a healthy relationship with violence, you're going to see school shootings. You're going to see sporadic act of violence where some dude just goes off and decides to drive his car into a crowd of people, which has happened lots of times. And they never have a prior history of criminal activity. It's just that switch because they have this unhealthy relationship where they're not allowed to express their violence in a structured way.
So I had to kind of give credit to what I'm about to say to the YouTuber What If All This. Super great, like, geopolitics. He's more into his videos are more into geopolitics.
You'll have to put me on later.
But originally his videos were like into more like alternate history just for fun.
Gotcha.
And now he's gotten more into like analyzing history. What if all of this?
Yeah. Okay, I think I know what you're talking about.
So the way he put it is, if you neglect any one of these natural aspects too much, it leads to illness. Like literal mental illness.
Yeah.
A beautiful example of this. When did pedophilia become a thing in the church? When they banned priests being allowed to marry.
That's an interesting point. You know what's interesting? Just a little side tangent. You know what I heard? So I heard that, and I don't know if this is true or not, but there's some study on this. I heard that most people that commit pedophilia that are in a position of authority don't actually have. So you know how like some people are actually attracted to like minors.
They're not actually pedophilic.
Exactly. So what I've heard, and I want to elaborate this because people are going to misconstrue this. So just give me a second to like formulate it.
Right.
The difference between a child molester and pedophilia. There is a difference. A child molester is just someone who has sex with someone who's considered to be a minor. A pedophile is someone who has attraction to someone a prepubescent child.
Yeah, that is literal pedophilia.
So there's
you have attraction to a prepubescent person.
Right. So if your age of consent, like in California, is 18, and you're a 40-year-old man, you have sex with a 17-year-old girl, you are a child molester, but you are not a pedophile because you were attracted to someone.
That's even more so than that. Criminally, it's statutory rape.
Sure,
because you're below the age of consent, but it's also child molestation.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It's both.
No, sure. No, I know it's tied into each other. That's not. But what I mean is that the interesting thing is that so people that commit child molestation, they're not. I mean, they could be pedophiles, but a lot of them, a good amount of them, do the child molestation because being in a position of authority creates this sort of weird psychological relationship with power, and they want to abuse that power. So I guess what I'm getting at is you got to be careful as like a parent, because it's not just scanning out, like, is my daughter's ballet teacher a pedophile? It's, what is my daughter's ballet teacher's relationship with authority and power?
Yeah.
So it's just because you mentioned the priest thing.
That's another very common thing.
Yeah. So it's not that pedophiles are attracted to becoming priests. It's that once people become a priest and they're sexually deprived, they're going to abuse their power to do horrible things.
They have an insane amount of authority over the people around them.
They have the moral authority of the church.
Not only do they have the moral authority, but they have their local population's trust from the parents to guide and look over their kids.
Right. So they can get away with so much.
Yes.
And so there was
a similar moral problem. This sort of a side tangent, but I'll mention it briefly. There's a similar moral problem that occurred in Sparta.
That was accepted by society, though. That was accepted.
There's actually I've seen debate that it was actually debated. Yeah. Some accepted it and some did not.
But what I mean is it wasn't criminally.
No, it was not criminal. But I'm saying
it's true of all Greece, though. It's not just Sparta.
No, but Sparta was because it was tradition for a young man to take a mentor.
But that's true in Athens too.
Yes, but it was heavily enforced in Sparta because of the military culture.
Yes, that's true.
Right? Because they all lived together in a barracks.
Well, because everyone had to join the military, so inherently everyone was going to be in a position where they could be molested.
And then there was this big debate. Not even one. It was an ongoing debate where some of them were like, no, we should totally be able to sleep with our mentors. And other guys were like, no, you should not cross that line into a sexual relationship between your mentor and student. You should never do that.
Right. And fun fact, obviously, like you said, the military kind of strengthened this, but it did exist in Athens.
Yes.
And one of the few people who rejected this was Socrates.
Socrates.
Did we talk about this? Yeah, base Socrates decided not to be a child molester. Yeah. So shout out to Socrates.
And that was one of the reasons the Athenians condemned him.
Yeah, because they thought this is suspicious. Because first of all, Socrates took no monetary payment for any of his works. Because at that time, most of the teachers were sophists. Yeah, and sophists essentially taught you how to win arguments and how to further your social standing and your success. Yeah. Like regardless of morals and etc. Whereas Socrates was
very principled, very very principled man.
Which is also one of the criticisms of him was how principled. Morally,
he has very little rigidity in any of his reasonings or thoughts or principles. Really.
That's why. So some people say like Nietzsche would argue that because of guys like Socrates, he led to the death of the Greek tragedy because the Greek tragedy is a very nuanced thing. Whereas
Socrates is very black and he's pretty straight.
He's more towards the Apollonian side, the ordered side, where like there are moral absolutes. Virtue is the highest form of like human, the highest form of value that humans should seek is virtue. Whereas Nietzsche would say it's important to recognize order and chaos. It's important to recognize the Apollonian and the Dionysian. But anyway, it's funny how we ended up back on topic.
But that's another tangent. That's another neat thing is that you cannot deny these instinctual desires or urges, or even arguably I'd say they're new requirements. These instinctual requirements. You can't like completely deny them. And we'll go into more why you can't also completely give into them. Yeah.
Because it's balancing human nature with social progress. Because, socially as we progress, we decide, for example, slavery is wrong. Right?
Yeah, we did. Yeah. So true. I think our morals have... it's weird. It kind of tracks with technology to some extent.
That's kind of a given.
It's an economic thing. Yeah. It almost seems like an economic thing.
Well, it is because the reason the North...
I was going to bring that up. The reason the North banned slavery first because they didn't economically depend on slavery.
And the reason why they started the war to end slavery, it wasn't a moral reason. Like, obviously, it was morally right. It's kind of like ESG. They happen to be morally correct, but they're not pushing...
But they're not actually pushing anything.
They're not...
they're not... What would you say?
Performing... Here, I'll kind of elaborate because I know...
Yeah, go ahead.
People might not have tuned into our live stream. So, essentially, ESG... is what so like a lot of companies will engage in social issues. So for example, companies that change their whole social media during Pride Month, or they'll talk about environmentalism like climate change. What this
the most common way you'll see it is they'll advertise being like green
or BLM or something
or BLM. Yeah, they'll like do these things during this social movement's time of the year. Yeah. For climate change, the really good example is always that, like, oh, this thing is recyclable. It's almost always a lie, by the way. what is actually recyclable is almost nothing.
Sure.
Very difficult to recycle things.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it. They don't like to do it.
All right, let's not go too off topic. We've been going off. But anyway, the point behind ESG is that companies will co-opt social movements which happen to be morally correct, but then they're going to push it in a way that furthers their own interests. So they're pushing this social issue, and it doesn't matter if that social issue happens to be right. They're probably going to push it in a way where they go past what is right or wrong, and they go into the extreme because it benefits them in one way or another.
Corporate activism.
Yeah, so like Occupy. So the biggest example that in the stream we did regarding Vivek Ramaswamy, 2024 presidential candidate, interviewed by Joe Rogan. I mean, not Joe Rogan, sorry. Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson. He talks about Occupy Wall Street and how, one of the good things about the left-wing movement at the time is they were calling out like Goldman Sachs, for example, for being bailed out by the government and sort of this crony relationship between a corporation and the state. But once, the left suddenly shifted from economic equality and questioning Wall Street to, racial justice, the environment,
they did
LGBTQ.
a really big switch. Like, it happened super quietly.
Yeah, it happened around the time Obama became president. Because the housing
that's
crash was right around that time.
That's what you were starting. Well, yeah, it was 2008.
Yeah, well, yeah, because I guess, so 2008's when he was elected and he was inaugurated 2009. So, yeah, right around that time. So
it's 14 years ago.
Yeah, crazy, right?
Wild.
But anyway, so what this relationship of ESG is very similar to what the North did in the Civil War, because although slavery was obviously wrong and morally evil, that was not the reason they started the war. The reason they started the war is because they thought, okay, we don't depend upon slaves. Our economy is run on free people, and it works that way. Whereas the Southern economy ran on slave labor. But if we go into the South and we free all the slaves, we're going to severely weaken the Southern elite, and their political power in the United States is going to go way down. And it did after the war.
That's totally why that's why they did the Emancipation Proclamation first. Yeah. That was... They probably knew war was coming. Yeah. Because the North was like, we should just get rid of slavery. Yeah. We don't need it. Yeah. And the South was like, well, we need it, and we want it, so we're keeping it. Yeah. And then they made like the whole, what's it called, the Mason-Dixie line?
Yeah. I think you're talking.
It was essentially a line
of where the slaves were free and where they were not slaves.
North of that was free state, south of that was a slave state. Mm-hmm. That was the consensus Congress came to. Right. That didn't go so well. No. Seeing as we still went to war over it. Mm-hmm. But after that, we did two huge things. Well, there was one huge effect, which is that the lack of slavery destroyed their economy, leaving them far poorer than the North. Mm-hmm. And then the other big thing is that to keep them from doing this again, we put most of our military bases in South. Right.
Yeah, even to this day, you'll see so many.
The majority of our army bases are
Fort Benning, Fort Jackson, Fort Sill. Mm-hmm. Anyway,
Fort Lost in the Woods.
Sure, Fort Hood. What a shitty place. Anyway, but yeah, so essentially what we're trying to describe is that oftentimes it's not morality that really pushes moral advancement. It's
a cultural or societal shift. Like technology is a really good example. Yeah. Or a new discovery of something. Sure. And that ends up pushing morals ahead of it.
Yeah, well, just look at colonialism. Colonialism still existed before World War II. World War II was the catalyst that really started leading to the decolonization of Africa, right?
The end of colonialism really was the World Wars.
Well, that's what the catalyst which led, because there's still colonies up until like the late 20th century. Oh yeah, but just like slow, like that's what started the decolonization process.
One of the only countries that's gotten away with it was France.
Portugal.
No, like to this day.
Oh, technically they have colonies.
It's not like, but they take all their money.
Oh, you mean the relationship?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
that's like the only country that I can think of that's like really, except for maybe the British.
Yeah, not as much as the French. I see what you're saying though, because you look at all the French military contractors, they're all over North Africa. Oh yeah.
Also, oh my god, this is specific. That's too much of a tangent. We need to get back on topic.
Here's the thing though with the French though, like Algeria, they had to evacuate 1 million French people out of Algeria when they gained their independence. So the difference I think is that the French really settled into their colonies a lot of times, whereas the British didn't as much. So they have more of a root within the colonies.
I mean, Australia. America.
But Australia is not. Australia became a peer. It wasn't a colony though, because it's completely comprised.
Not anymore, but it was.
It's a different kind of colony because it's comprised of the native population rather than the subjugation of like.
I mean,
an indigenous population.
Subjugated the
Right, but
indigenous.
but here's the difference.
Yeah, they did.
The workforce and the labor was like the Indians all died for the most part. And they were replaced by the Europeans.
I mean, in the case of Australia, it's really weird. Canada might be a better example, and same with New Zealand.
Australia is the same as Canada, in my opinion, and New Zealand.
No, because Australia was a prison.
Penal colony, but made up of Anglo-Europeans.
Yeah, it was a prison colony of Anglo-Europeans.
But my point is...
But Canada wasn't that.
Yeah.
Canada was all merchants, businessmen, traders,
in that way, it's different.
laborers.
What I'm getting at is that African countries, or regular British colonies, are the indigenous population of those countries being subjugated by the British.
Like the British Raj?
Yeah.
India?
Yeah. But America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand are all made up of British people who came there and settled there, and the majority population
and then just remove
European.
the natives.
Yeah. Or they just outpopulated them.
Yeah. They outpopulated them, or they forcibly removed them.
Right. So that's the distinction I'm making. But anyway, back to the original point, right? So we're talking about how, technological change is a catalyst for sort of the moral growth throughout history. Things like the Civil War, obviously, like we just said, that was as a result of technology, which was the industrialization of the North, factories, right? Whereas, and it's interesting too. This is one of the ways that the South grew decadent is because slavery was such an easy way for them to make money, they never advanced technologically.
No.
So the same way that the Spartans never advanced technologically in regards to agriculture,
because they had such a huge
slave class. They had the Helot population. Yep. They had so many Helots that they had to keep...
It was like a 10-1.
Yeah, they had to keep 10,000 Spartans in Sparta at all times to maintain the slave population. Yes. So when you have a society that the instruments of growth are stifled by convenience, so in the case of the South or Sparta or many other examples, really, then they have no necessity. Like suffering and needing to overcome an issue is a catalyst for growth.
Yes.
Well,
any obstacle is a catalyst for a new solution.
Right, which is where, order and chaos, again, they come into play.
That chaos gives you an opportunity to create a new structure.
Exactly.
And order.
So it's a good way to segue back into the conversation.
Segueing back into what we're on here.
Yeah, so obviously the balance is important. That's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah, need to...
To summarize, when you have too chaotic of a society, obviously, you lead to an anarchist state. People are killing each other over, control over resources. If you have too ordered a state, you end up with, take the I think communism is the best example of complete order. And I'll tell you why. Because it is a negation of human nature. To not have private property, to not have status.
They attempt to remove hierarchy.
Well, the end state of a communist state is technically supposed to be an anarchist state.
Yes.
So how the hell are you going to, you know what I mean? Like it's an impossible task, really, to restructure a state from being completely based on a single authority to everyone with their own authority.
Because the theory was to remove class.
Right.
And if you remove class, then you can reprogram humans.
Yeah, but that's rooted. Class is rooted in human nature. So the reason why I use communism.
I'll let you finish first.
Sure. I was going to say the reason I use communism is the perfect example of what happens when you have too much order, and complete order is that, people need individual incentives to want to do things. Like the most passionate people about their job are passionate because, they like their job and they realize they can make money from their job. If you tell someone you're going to go become a bricklayer, and they have no say over it, but you happen to have a quota for bricklayers, and you say, all right, let's put these guys in there. They seem like they'd be good bricklayers. They're not going to give a shit. They're not going to be the best bricklayers. The best bricklayers are going to be someone who loves what they do and realize they can make money off of it. That's how passion turns into something that's really going to make you successful. And you don't have that same relationship in a communist system, even in other forms of authoritarianism, after feudalism, because feudalism kind of functions similarly, honestly.
Feudalism does function pretty until you get to end of feudalism where they have a mercantile class.
Well, that's what I mean. Once you have absolute monarchies and you kind of have the dissolution of the feud, because the feudal system depends upon each individual lord having their own territory, kind of their own castle. But once you have the growth of municipalities, you have actual cities and people living in those cities,
and then you have the mercantile class. Yeah, the mercantile class, and you have other laborers doing other things.
Right.
And now there's not just the peasantry and the nobility. Now you have this weird in-between area who profit from both and utilize both for their own success.
Exactly. And there's more social mobility.
And they can just leave.
Yeah.
That's another big deal. A lord can't just leave. A peasant couldn't really just leave.
Yeah, but then once you you go towards, you end feudalism and you go more into like the sort of
like a merchant could just go to another city.
Yeah.
You just leave your city, and then you lose his business.
Mm-hmm. But essentially, it's once you start to have your own choice over like your occupation, and you get monetary reward, you get some form of reward from your service.
Yeah, you get a reward that you value.
Yeah,
you get value for something you do.
It's an organic instrument of expansion. So again, back to the book I was mentioning, Evolution of Civilization by Carol Quigley. He talks about what happens in a society where you end up with an organic instrument of expansion that comes about naturally due to necessity, due to individuals. Like, look at the colonization of America. What if we just told people to be colonizers? Like, you're going to go colonize there. They're not going to work hard to colonize there. Yeah, but these people, they wanted to freely express their religion, have religious communities, so they were very passionate.
And the British kicked him out.
Kind of. It was a weird situation.
Yeah. But they needed a new place to live.
Yeah.
And to espouse their kind of crazy religion.
But that same craziness is why America was so educated, because the Puritanism was all based upon literacy and being able to read the Bible in your native language. Therefore, everyone could read, or at least all the men could read, because women weren't really allowed to have an education back then. But what we're getting, what was that?
That's tough, bro.
Yeah.
That's tough,
all right.
bro.
What I'm getting at though, essentially here, is that when you have a society which is not organic, like you institutionalize instruments of expansion. So let me give you an example of an instrument of expansion. Just look at let's look at I'm trying to think of a specific job sector. So let's take communist state versus like a free market state. And you have a free market state. It doesn't have to be a democracy. There's authoritarian, more capitalist systems as well. But it comes down to, like, let's look at being a doctor. In Cuba, a doctor makes less than a taxi cab driver. You know why?
Because they get taxed to shit.
What?
Like the doctor in Cuba is gonna make less.
No, but he makes less than a taxi driver in Cuba. Do you know why?
Specifically a taxi driver?
Yeah.
No.
I'll tell you why. Because a taxi driver is driving around tourists who have foreign money.
Oh shit.
So they're paying them for those specific. It's not the government paying the taxi driver. It's an individual service, and the doctors are getting paid directly by the government. Now, Cuba happens to have really good doctors compared to the fact that they're a super small country. The Cuban doctors were actually the Time People of the Year in like the 90s or something, or early 2000s.
Cuba.
What's up?
Also because they fled Cuba.
No, I mean Cuban doctors that were hired by the state.
Oh,
were the Times People of the Year. Cuban doctors, because they have such good doctors. But
I didn't know that.
Right, but eventually the doctors are going to be like, and this is what's happening in Cuba. They're like, well,
why would I stay here?
Yeah, why would
My level of expertise and skill gains me so much more value in the United States. Why would I stay in this country where I make less than like a guy who makes money off tips?
Right, so that's an institutionalized part of society. When you institutionalize something like doctors, and you say you're going to get a specific amount of payment, they're not going to care anymore. They're going to leave. They're going to go someplace where it's not institutionalized, where the free market incentivizes like being a doctor. But of course, there's a balance. You can't always expect. Like it goes back
free
to
market, right?
Chaos.
So like free market isn't going to end well every time either, because if you leave, that's the thing.
It's a good balance. We got to find the balance.
If you leave pure chaos just for long enough, and I would say this is in almost any field, geopolitics and economics, at least those major two.
Well, it's true today. Just look at America.
If you look in either of these two fields, and you leave that space in complete chaos, someone's just going to end up ruling everything.
Well, that's one aspect, right? First of all, people are going to take advantage. Yeah,
the free market will almost always trend toward a monopoly eventually.
Yeah.
And in geopolitics, you will always have a superpower,
right? Who
influences or directly controls the majority of the space.
Yes, that's part of it, but also within economics. I'm not just talking about. So yeah, obviously monopolization, right? But it also comes down to having a shortage of people in specific job markets. If you give everyone total freedom, like look, everyone wants to be a fucking TikToker nowadays, or they want to go get an art degree.
Who's gonna maintain our roads?
No, seriously though. Look,
seriously, no. Who's gonna go be the brick?
Who's gonna go build? Who's gonna carry the boats?
Who's gonna carry the?
No. But
who's gonna carry the boats?
It's true. Look how many people have art degrees and like music degrees and shit, and in college, and they never do anything with it because it's like, well, they had this concept that they can do whatever they want with their life, and they go on and they do something completely stupid. Like I want to study philosophy in college, but I want to study philosophy knowing that I'm not gonna make jack shit from philosophy.
No, you're
I'm gonna have to do something else to make money. I just want to learn. But people think that they can actually get an art degree or get a photography degree or get a music degree, and very few of those people actually get those degrees are going to be successful.
A lot of those people just end up going back into the school system.
And teaching, right? Yeah, those who can't teach. So when you allow too much freedom within the free market, sometimes you're just not, like, obviously it could lead, monopoly is one of the things it could lead to in a geopolitical sense. Some people are going to become more powerful, but just from a practical perspective, you're not going to have enough people in a specific job field if, you just give them too much freedom and say, go do whatever you want. If you give the kids this idea that they can be whatever they want when they grow up, like, no, you can't be whatever you want.
Like, tell them to, don't tell them to do only shit they hate. They'll just be miserable.
Right, but you can't just...
But you also can't tell them to just, follow your dreams.
Yeah.
Your dreams are kind of crazy sometimes. They might not always work. You might just have a complete misunderstanding of how a job market's actually going to operate. So why are you going to get a degree in art or
most great artists don't even have an art degree. Most great musicians don't have a musician degree. Most of them don't. Yeah. Now, philosophy, most of the great philosophers did go to school for philosophy. So that's why I'm going to do it.
Well, they studied it.
They went to school for it. Most of them have, like, an actual degree in it. Because the reason why is because to become a great philosopher, you need to be able to network, and you need to talk to other intellectuals.
I guess that's
because getting a philosophy degree as like a bachelor's doesn't really matter. Now, when it comes to getting a PhD, that's when getting a philosophy degree matters in terms of, like, that's going to help you become a part of the intellectual community. But first of all, you're not going to have enough money as an artist. What's up?
I have like no.
Dude, you're an intellectual.
I have almost no respect for modern intellectuals.
Okay, sure, but we're intellectuals, aren't we?
Them.
We're intellectuals.
We're just
trying to be cool, and not lame, But anyway, you can't have too much. So it's interesting that you bring up the geopolitical system. So let's talk about. We kind of talked just now about the economic ramifications of order versus chaos. But let's talk about power in general in a society, right? Communist system. We can go back to that for just power. Look what happens when you say, we're gonna say who ends up in power. We're gonna create this bureaucracy, based on specific things. Or look at feudalism, when the political bureaucracy was literally made up of what family you were born into. Without social mobility, without a certain level of chaos, you're not going to create the best political bureaucracy because it's not
the most efficient society.
Because you're not going to have the most capable people in the political bureaucracy. Because if you're just picking people based on their political loyalty in a communist system, or if you pick people just based on what family they were born into, which is a feudal system, you're not going to get the most capable people. You need a meritocracy, but at the same time, you do need a certain level of continuity. If you just kind of
you still need structure.
Exactly.
You can't just pick people because you like them.
Right. Or you can't just pick people, like, you have to pick people, because in a completely chaotic system, there would be no picking. You have a free market, and you have a free market in relation to politics. Like, you take an anarchist system, right?
Then whoever really has the most power. My anarchist friend would disagree with me.
Okay, but he's not here.
He doesn't understand hierarchies.
Yeah.
But if, theoretically, you have an anarchist system where there is no form of government, there is no law.
There's no limit to power.
There's no limit to power or anything. The people who are going to be in power, if you will, proverbially fill that power void, are going to be the people most willing to wield every aspect of value they have.
Yeah.
And leverage everything and conquer.
The most capable, in a sense.
The most capable of managing other human beings and just power.
And social manipulation.
Yes.
Yeah. Because non-aggression... Voice crack. Non-aggression principle is bullshit. It's just it's a non-existent phenomenon. Like, unless you can social engineer, so this is the idea behind communism, is that you can socially engineer the people for such a long time that once you create an anarchist state, they're somehow going to maintain that. That's the idea.
Yeah, bullshit.
Oh, who knows? It could happen, but it doesn't sound very attainable or reasonable,
Humans
right?
have been around for like 100,000
sure.
years.
I know. I'm just saying it could happen.
Okay, but
just a low chance. But
I would say you could. You could reach this state for maybe a decade.
Maybe.
In some parts. If it's super, super decentralized. So pretty much hunter-gatherers with better modern commodities.
Yeah.
Ish.
But it's not going to last.
No. Because somebody who owns some factory is going to hire some other group of people who are really good at fighting to go kill this other factory who's competing with him.
And then he's going to have two factories, which means he's going to beat all the guys with one factory.
And then he's going to take that same people that he hired, he's going to essentially turn them into a standing army.
Yeah.
And take that and conquer everybody else.
Yeah.
Unless other people rise up and do the same thing, and then what do you have? city-states.
Mm-hmm.
Then what do these city-states become? Nation-states. What do these nation-states become?
Empires.
Yeah. And there you go. Now you're just back to modern day.
Yeah.
It's just like a repeating. You can't break it.
Right. And
I guess, like...
Well, that's why we have to balance order and chaos.
Yeah,
you can break it.
You can kind of break it. You can stabilize it.
Well, here's the thing, right? It's about balancing order with organic incentive. You have to. So here's ways that you can like incentivize certain things. Let's say you want women to have more children in your society, right? You can't just force them to have kids. But here's something like, all right, this is a funny thing. I'm gonna give you a really funny example of how some people did this. So I'm not really sure how the Chinese did it. I know that the reason why they had a population boom and they have an issue with too many people. They don't anymore, but when they did, it was because Mao Zedong somehow, I forget how he did it, but he incentivized...
It was financial incentivization, same as the United States.
Maybe, but I don't know the specifics, so I'm not going to go into that example.
Not exactly the same, but it was similar to my understanding. Cause, well, an example is literally in the United States, you get a tax break if you have more dependents.
Sure.
Like legal dependents.
But it doesn't outweigh the cost of raising a child.
Oh, no.
But here, I have actually a good example that I found out about recently, and it's really funny and kind of fascinating. So, there's two examples within this example. So you take Nazi Germany, right? Yeah. The first example, of course, they have Lebensborn, which was more of a eugenics program. They would get like the most Aryan features in women and men. I don't know. You gotta think, if they pick the most like attractive people, they're gonna have some attractive children.
That's probably why the Germans are so fucking attractive.
Yeah, no, honestly, no, but
point for another
here's what they would do. They would literally get the most attractive, like blonde hair, blue eyed man and blonde hair, blue eyed woman, the tallest, the strongest, and they'd have baby factories, literally, and the kids would be raised up to be SS super soldiers. But this isn't actually what I'm getting at. This is just a small example. The better example of incentivization of population growth was, do you know how they had the Hitler Youth?
Yeah.
So they had a girls' version of Hitler Youth too. It was called something different. It wasn't called like the Hitler Female Youth. It was called like the Women of German, something like that, right? Like the German girls. Now what they would do is they would have what they called a jamboree. And what they would do is get all the listen. You're gonna love this. They would get all the horny teenage guys and all the horny teenage girls, and they would have a big get together and a big party. And of course, they were left alone at night. And then...
Probably with alcohol.
Right. And when these girls got home...
Come on, this is the 30s.
When these girls got home, they were pregnant. Now, the natural dad's reaction, German dad, to have a woman get pregnant out of wedlock is to shun them. But you know what happened? The Gestapo would come to their door and say, you're not going to shun your daughter. We are going to give you an extra financial...
We're going to give you a financial incentive, and these two kids are going to get married, and they're going to raise this kid.
It wasn't even like
get married.
No.
They
didn't even have to get married, or the guy didn't even have to have a say in it because the state was going to take care of. Because if you think about it, within like Nazi German society, how structured their child rearing process, or not child rearing, but their education system was, like you really didn't need a dad. Like Hitler was everyone's father. The Hitler Youth program literally covered every facet of their lives. So like it didn't matter if this kid didn't have a father; he was gonna have tons of male role models, fucking soldiers, all this bullshit. So. That was one way they incentivized it, was the women were not...
Indoctrinate the youth if you ever want to take over the world, just a tip.
Okay. I mean, technically, yeah.
That's like the...
Unfortunate reality, yeah. Child soldiers,
kids are
in Africa.
Really susceptible.
Oh, what's the word? Malleable? They're very malleable.
Yeah, they're very malleable. Malleable.
But, listen, right?
Anyway.
I have, just to go off of that, so the way that they were able to sort of cause this was, the general consensus of a society is, if a woman has sex out of wedlock and has a kid, she's a whore. But they were like, no, she's contributing to the German state. So they incentivized it by taking away the social stigma. Like, she was honored to an extent. Because the Gestapo would literally come to her house and tell her dad.
She had the child of one of Hitler's youths.
Yeah, and she had a child that was going to grow up to be a German soldier or whatever.
Right. Become one of those SS super soldiers.
Yeah, so they incentivize it organically with a little bit of order by taking away the social stigma.
But they provide the pleasure and the chaos... Especially young people.
Oh yeah! Imagine that Hitler Youth, like you're going, you're fighting, you're learning how to shoot, and then it's like, all right, now it's time to get laid. Like they.
Now you're gonna go to a huge party with a bunch of the nation's most attractive women.
Yeah.
There's no way you're not getting some after that.
Anyway, but like, see what I mean? So, I mean, I'm not saying that we should do that or whatever, but
no,
that's just an example of like an organic way of
You can structure. You can almost make order contain chaos. That's like the goal.
Yeah.
Is to have contained
That is
chaos
exactly the goal.
within your society.
Well, that's the whole point of the Greek tragedy. The Greek tragedy. So let's take Oedipus, for example. This is a really interesting, because I'm reading...
Oedipus is...
Well, I'm going to tell you exactly. This is really interesting, because I'm reading The Birth of Tragedy right now.
I want to see where you're going
with
it's
this. It's going to blow your mind a little bit. So, obviously, just to help the viewers out, Oedipus, essentially, is a Greek play about... so there's this king. I forget what Oedipus's dad's name was. What was his name? Well, Oedipus's dad was this king, and he had a prophecy that his son... He would have a son who was going to kill his father and marry his mother. So, to avoid this prophecy... Oedipus's dad had one of his servants take baby Oedipus out to kill him, but instead of killing him...
No, you fucked up the start of it.
Why?
So the king was told that his son would kill him.
And
Oedipus was told...
Oh, that he would marry his mother.
That he would kill his father and marry his mother.
Gotcha, okay,
so
I mixed it up a little bit.
So the dad goes and tries to get rid of his son. He tries to have his killed, but the guy, feels some guilt.
Kind of like Snow White some shit. Like some Snow White shit.
He feels some guilt and he leaves the kid and just, fucks off. Yeah. But the kid is found by a shepherd and he's raised by them. Mm-hmm. So in his mind, his dad is a shepherd.
Yeah.
He gets told this prophecy at some point, and he's like, I'm running away.
So he leaves the shepherd.
So he leaves home, and on his way, I don't know how it happens. You've probably read it.
Yeah, so so on his way to the kingdom, he encounters the Sphinx. Now, the Sphinx is sort of keeping this kingdom...
That's the story the Sphinx comes from?
Yes, the riddle.
Oh, the riddle of the Sphinx?
So the story of this... Well, I mean, Sphinx comes up a lot in Greek mythology, but this is like the famous story. Mm-hmm. So essentially, the Sphinx is keeping this this kingdom, kind of subjugated, because nobody can... and the only way to defeat the Sphinx is by passing its riddle.
Oh, yes, answering the riddle.
Yeah. And the riddle doesn't matter. It's essentially something like what walks on...
What walks on 4 legs in the morning.
Yes.
2 legs in the afternoon and 3 legs in the evening.
Yeah, because of Cain. Because so 4 legs being a baby, 2 legs being an adult, and 3 legs being an old man with a cane. Yep. And he said a human, and he won it. Now, here's the message behind that. It's Oedipus actually represents the ultimate display of the Apollonian, and I'll tell you why. Because the ultimate display of an Apollonian is completely rational. It's completely negating nature. Because nature was the Sphinx. The Sphinx represented nature, and wisdom represents your rationality. Mm-hmm. It represents overcoming nature. So Oedipus, by being wise and being able to pass through the Sphinx, which represents nature,
and then also getting the knowledge that he's supposed to...
I don't know if that's part of it. It might be.
That is because think about it. He takes that prophecy. And
he's trying to act on it.
Well, if that's what's going to happen, logically, I should act on it.
I can avoid it. And by trying to avoid it... Yeah, you're right now. I totally realize that.
Into it.
Yes.
Because by trying to avoid killing his father and marrying his mother...
Avoid nature.
Natural,
yeah.
He kills his father on the way to the city, becomes king, and marries his mother. Then realizing this, he gouges his eyes out and jumps off the top of a building.
But here's the thing. And it goes a little further and deeper. So
okay.
you actually... I didn't realize that. It's good that you mentioned that because I didn't think about that. So he tries to negate nature.
Yeah.
And in negating nature, trying to do it through wisdom, he still ends up doing the bad thing, which means that you can never truly escape your nature. You can never truly escape the Dionysian human nature. But in doing all these horrible things, in killing his father and sleeping with his mother, he has a kid. And the daughter of him and his mother ends up being a hero. Right?
I don't know that at all.
Yeah, she ends up doing a lot of great things and going on these journeys. Now, in a fucked up way, what this represents is that, nature has like a plan, kind of, and it may be a completely chaotic plan. It may not always work, but through that nature, something good came out of it, which is kind of weird given the context.
Given this story, it's a really weird story.
Yeah. But that's the Greek tragedy. It's the balancing of order and chaos, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. You can't completely get rid of your human element, and that's what this story was about, really. You do need wisdom. Wisdom is important, and ordering your society in a specific way is important. But you can never, like you said,
you can never order it in such a way that you can escape nature, and
you can never order in a way where you can ignore those natural urges.
Or very often you can apply it very more literally to the story of Oedipus in that you can never structure yourself in such a way or your life in such a way that you will escape your fate.
Right. Exactly. I couldn't have put it better myself. I mean, and this kind of goes into, so I showed you my little script. I'm going to be doing a little bit of my script that I'm going to be doing on Fight Club, and one of the things I'm going to talk about in that video is, in Fight Club, it's these men that are emasculated because society tells them being violent is bad. It tells them to be docile and subservient. But the natural human urge, especially for a man, is to be violent, is to be warlike, because it is in our nature that we must be warlike to survive. So when you completely ignore our relationship with violence, and you have no relationship with violence, you're going to seek it out in its most basic form. Yeah. So here's non-basic forms of expressing this violent energy. Farming sounds funny, but it's a labor-intensive job. Yeah. Building, basically any labor-intensive job that requires you, farming, working in a factory, all these different things.
I mean, you could go.
But there's more to it.
Pretty much any very, very physically intensive job that takes that energy out of you.
Yes, that fulfills
that role.
Exactly. And
to
then
some extent.
If you're working a 9 to 5, you need to work out. You need to practice martial, like jiu-jitsu is really good.
Something.
Yeah, you need to do something. But if you have no relationship with it at all, you're going to seek it in its most basic form, which is pure raw combat, which is Fight Club.
Completely uncontrolled violence.
And that is still controlled because it's a club. Right, so that's
even Fight Club is controlled because it is a club, right? It has it only has one rule, but
it has a few rules actually. There was a lot of rules.
Oh, was there a lot of rules?
Yeah, there were a lot of rules. Like only two to fight. No shirt, no shoes. Anyway, but
it still has a structure, even though it's chaos. It's still organized chaos.
It's organized chaos of the the most basic form of combat.
I mean, the perfect example of what you're talking about, where you will lash out or as Carl Jung would say, your shadow would lash out. Right? Because this concept pops up in psychology.
Yeah, I was watching a Carl Jung video today actually.
It's very interesting.
Yeah,
very nice rabbit hole.
Similar to Nietzsche in some ways, individuation and 3 stages of life. Anyway,
as he would say, your shadow lashes out, and the part of you that is not only willing but capable and happy even to commit violence will pop up. Beautiful modern example of that would be mass shootings.
Yeah. Well, it's not beautiful, but...
When I say beautiful... Okay.
I know what you mean.
I do not mean beautiful in the sense that the act is beautiful. I mean, it fits the argument perfectly. Yeah. It fits what I'm saying perfectly. It is an example of someone who has not integrated violence into their life, and their entire life they have been told and ordered that this is wrong, that you cannot commit this, you cannot do this, do not be violent in any sense.
Exactly.
Be peaceful, be docile.
So it's like turtled. You're like hurtling up all that violent energy, and it comes out like that. And that's another problem, since we shun violence so much. This is the reason why things like school shootings happen. Back in the day, when people would just get into fights when they disagreed on something. And I don't know why we shun that so much. Fighting is a very healthy way to express violence, because
especially for young boys.
Yes, you need
boys. Fighting is how you mediate.
You remember that Gillette commercial where these boys are wrestling and the dad pulls them apart and says, "No, that's not how we treat each other." That pissed me the fuck off. That is the most beta bitch dad ever.
Me and my best friend, we would fight constantly. I've known this man for 12 years.
You never hurt him that bad?
No.
It was just...
He did hit me in the head with a rock one time.
Oh, that's pretty fucked. He shouldn't have done that.
I was accidental.
Okay.
Allegedly accidental.
What's his name?
His name's Ezra.
Hey, Ezra.
It's better because we both have biblical names.
You gotta send him this video.
I totally should. Just that clip.
Yeah. 127:53.
So, we fought constantly. Yeah. We'd be playing all the time because we were kids, but we would have a disagreement on what we wanted to do, or, I hit you with a stick too hard. Yeah. So now we're hitting each other with a stick. And he'd go home, and maybe we'd just stop playing that whole day. And he'd just go home to his mom, and his mom would be like, "What the hell happened?" Yeah. And he's like, "Doesn't matter." And then my mom would be like, "You good?" And I'm like, "Doesn't matter." Yeah. Next day, meet back up, nothing happened.
Exactly.
Why? Because we fought it out.
Exactly.
We mediated it, right? We came to our own conclusion.
That's why I think men... Alright, this is going to be slightly controversial take. That's why I think men generally have easier... male friendships, in my opinion, are more straightforward than women's friendships. Because a lot of times women will sort of talk about each other behind their back. There'll be sort of this weird social rivalry thing. If you try to outshine another woman. Whereas men, it's just straight up I generally...
Even amongst my friends, if something gets super, super heated, we both know this will escalate to violence. Yeah. We all know in the back of our head that we know where this goes.
Walk softly but carry a big stick.
We all know where this goes. It always is going to lead to a physical confrontation. And most men, or really pretty much every man I've talked to, will have the same phenomena even when interacting with strangers.
Yeah.
With male strangers.
Mm-hmm. If they're not completely like weak.
I guess if they're not completely docile. But,
Yeah.
But if you have any
a lot of them are nowadays.
I suppose, yeah, that's true. But I don't know, not all of my friends. But if you have any sense of violence about you, and I don't mean like you're a violent person.
Yeah.
But that you
capability of violence.
Yeah, that you fought with your friends when you were a kid.
Yeah.
It could be that simple. You've practiced some martial arts.
Yeah.
When you're interacting with people, that is one of the things you use to analyze other
body
people.
language.
Is
Yeah.
body language.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see as a guy gets more aggressive, all the other guys in the area, we will all instinctually do like the same thing. We'll all be like, hey, why the hell are you getting so aggressive right now? Are
Right.
you gonna have a problem?
Well, it's like, why do you shake hands?
Yeah. That's like, do you want an answer? Like
Okay,
a logical
Well,
answer? Or like why?
Why do you wave and shake hands? You wave and shake hands because it shows
nothing in my hands.
I have no weapons.
I have no weapons.
My hands aren't curled up. I'm in a docile position. Yep. And
you're seceding showcase, and then you're proving.
Why do you or like?
Why do you squeeze slightly?
That too, but that's I don't know actually. Why do you squeeze slightly?
Like why do you squeeze slightly?
And why do you?
Why do I?
I just was told to.
So I think psychologically.
It's to show your strength.
But where does it come from? It probably comes from to determine that we're both
strong.
I'm not just gonna take whatever you have to give me.
Right.
I'm gonna provide an equal footing here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This is not a one-sided interaction.
Well, like
this is two people.
You know, like people. No, get your drink. You know, like cheersing drinks.
Oh.
Remember? Well, I don't know if it's true, but I heard supposedly it's if there's poison.
Yes. That's the theory. That's what I've heard as well.
Who knows?
That's what I've heard as well.
People also said you have to say bless you when you sneeze because like the devil will go inside you. I don't know. Who the fuck knows?
That's just like medieval and old culture traditions.
Here's the thing with meta narratives. Sometimes something may not be true originally, but it becomes true because it becomes
true because everyone thinks about it.
Exactly. Like mythology.
Anyway.
That's how mythology becomes
mythology. That's
religion.
That's why having a cultural mythology is
pantheism.
So
like a pantheism.
Even if it's not even if you're monotheistic. Catholicism is a great example because they have all the angels, they have all the saints, they have the Mother Mary, like they have so much other stuff.
It's almost like a reflection of a polytheistic.
It's pretty much a pantheon.
Well, even look at the Trinity. Also, I got to pee, so we're going to pause this really quick. Temporary pause. So back from bathroom break. So, you know, like we said, a healthy relationship with violence is necessary.
It's extremely important.
Yeah, I think it's something that we really as a society need to tackle. Yeah. Young men should be put, whether it's sports, they need some sort of
outlet, something, especially something to teach them to control their violence, and to control themselves.
Controlled violence.
Sports is typically an amazing way.
Especially if you don't want to go too martial, you know?
Yeah, you don't want to go too much. But I would almost always recommend
some martial art, I would say.
Boxing.
Yeah, or jiu-jitsu. I think jiu-jitsu is really good because it's easy to avoid getting too hurt in jiu-jitsu, whereas boxing, you get like brain damage and shit.
You get your head rattled.
I've been hit a few times. I know.
Yeah.
But no, I think children should be young, and women too. I think it'd be good for women too. Yep. The difference is that men need to. Women, there's less of a biological necessity for them to be violent and have a healthy relationship with violence. Men need to because of it's just the nature of man.
I think women ought to.
Yeah, for self-defense.
Not as big of a requirement. Not just for self-defense, but also just for understanding how to fight people.
Yeah, it's always
how to defend themselves, how to prevent a man from completely just like destroying their shit.
Well, it's self-defense.
Yeah. I'm not thinking just about like women. I guess.
No, self-defense gets a man. It's important.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Carry a gun.
Sure.
I don't know.
No, guns are a really good way to like bridge that strength advantage that a man would have. Guns were literally the end of the feudal state because it didn't matter. You couldn't really hide behind your castle all of a sudden if any old peasant could man some cannons and a gun.
Man some cannons.
Yeah.
And then you got like really. Never mind. I was back into like the really clever architectural and engineering of a star fort. It's designed to reflect cannon.
I could see why.
It's designed to make cannonballs essentially reflect.
Well, it's because it's hard to get a direct hit on a star fort.
Exactly.
And then if you do, you're gonna hit the side of it. You're not gonna hit the star fort.
Pling.
Yeah. Anyway, shut up. Too many tangents. No, I was kidding.
I'm trying.
I know. But I think that's an integral aspect of society that you should have. Now, let's see. What else do we want to talk about? Of course, we've kind of like without looking at those things, we've kind of covered them. We should. Culture. Ooh, that's a
Yeah,
good
so
one.
we haven't touched on culture. at all.
Culture versus. So wait, really quick. What else did you say? Fundamental value structures, theories of labor, hierarchies. We kind of talked about it, so culture is the next.
Yeah. But I want to talk about how your culture's relationship to order and chaos is extremely integral to finding that balance. And two really good juxtapose examples is the United States and China. So China, for thousands of years, have existed in an extremely authoritarian environment.
Right.
Their entire culture has been top down. It used to be ordained from God, monarchy.
The mandate of heaven. Yeah.
Mandate of heaven. And then it became Communist Party, which is pretty much the mandate of heaven.
Well, especially now that they have a central figure again.
Yes.
With Xi Jinping. You know.
Well, they had one with Mao too, but they lost him.
Well, it's like a kind of it's the same thing in Russia. You start with Stalin, then you have oh shit, one person can really fuck things up. So you had de-Stalinization. You said de-Maoization.
De-Maoization.
You know, the decentralizing.
But now they're back to Xing. Right? They just have Xi Jinping.
Do you call him Xing? What the fuck?
Okay, would you rather me call him what's the
Winnie the Pooh?
Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, I would actually. Winnie.
So they have Winnie the Pooh, right? But in America. Our history is a lot more chaotic.
Yeah.
We have our entire history has come from a merchant class. Almost all of the founding fathers were merchants. Yeah.
To one respect or another.
Yeah, from one respect or another, there was always businessmen. One of the few exceptions to this is at least one of the few exceptions that I can think of. I could totally be wrong.
Sure.
Is George Washington. He was a soldier in the British Army.
Yes, during the French and Indian War. Was he a professional soldier or was he just a volunteer soldier?
He asked for a commission and didn't get it.
Because he still had land.
Yeah.
His family had land, so I don't know if this...
I think his family might have been farmers, but he fought for the British.
Yeah, but he still comes from a more entrepreneur
That's true. He does come from some... But that's an agricultural class, right? Like it's like a farming class.
Sure.
Because they owned land.
Yeah.
In Virginia. Anyway... a lot of the founding fathers were businessmen, philosophers, merchants, like whatever you want to call them, right? They did not come from a nobility class, most of them. Nor did most of them come from any like super low class. They were a really weird...
What's the Puritan aspect? So it's like people who are smart, who had enough wealth to travel across the sea and start a new life, but not too much that they could have stayed in England and prosperous.
Yeah, they could just stay in England.
And that's why they all were tough, because they had to deal with an arduous journey all the way over here, and then they had to they had a Faustian relationship with nature. They literally had to fight nature. They had to fight off Indians, or Native Americans.
It was a very rough first decade.
They had to fight the French. Yeah. So they were forged in fire.
Yes.
And they were smart because of the Puritan tradition.
They were very educated.
Well, look at the college system in America.
Does it come from their tradition?
A lot of it does. Well, just look how many Christian universities you have.
That's a good point. Yeah, the Christians are always really heavy on education, which is fascinating because most religions in the past were not.
Well, it's same with Christianity. Christianity used to be against religion. I mean, Christianity used to be education. Yeah,
I think one of the only...
and Islam used to be very pro-education at one point.
And then now it's not. I think one of the most... It's not weird. The most consistent... The most consistent pro-education religion that I know of is probably Orthodox Judaism.
I don't know enough about it to say one way or another.
Because to my understanding, they are very learn how this all works.
No, I'm sure it's true. I just don't know about it that well. Aren't you slightly Orthodox Jew? Or is it Ashkenazi?
No, I think it is Ashkenazi, but
wow, you even know?
1/8 Polish Jew.
Okay, that's probably Ashkenazi.
Yeah, it's technically would be Ashkenazi.
Yeah, go on.
Doesn't really matter. Anyway,
what kind of Jew are you?
The point is, I don't know. I haven't looked at my genetics.
I know I'm being stupid. Come on.
So, I had a whole fucking point. Okay, so the juxtapose these two examples, right? So the United States became from a far freer, more forge your own path, do
meritocratic,
your own thing, meritocratic,
social mobility,
chaos, right? That Dionysian. I keep fucking up the name.
I would disagree because I think the Apollonian nature of
was still there.
Well, no. Here's the thing. I think our government was it was not Dionysian. It was chaotic.
Yes, it was
because Dionysian is more relating to animalistic. I think we're actually the men themselves were actually Apollonian.
Yes,
by virtue of their own
very Dionysian world.
It's not Dionysian though.
Dionysian
only really
you just say chaotic
because Dionysian only relates to individual humans. Or if your whole society is like morally decadent and hedonistic. No, but no, I get what you're trying to say. But I'm saying that they themselves were Apollonian because they're Puritans. Yeah. They're Puritans, but they lived in a chaotic world.
Yes,
so a chaotic government structure.
I'll use just the basic terms of chaos and order, or even better, dynamic and static.
Mm-hmm.
The Chinese culture came from a very static history.
Yeah.
While the American culture came from a very dynamic, very rapid changing world.
And very new.
Very new.
Yeah.
And
totally opposite.
Stuff was changing all the time.
Yeah.
There would be a new group of people attacking you. You would have to have new crops because your shit was always dying because we were new there. We didn't know how the seasons were functioning there. I mean, they worked similarly, but it's not the exact same. There's a lot of variables you have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that insane amount of chaos, they had to create a very dynamic culture.
Mm-hmm.
That dynamic culture lends itself to more freedom and more chaos.
Mm.
As long as you have that little box you draw around the chaos.
Well, here's the thing. Here's why it worked early on. Because the people themselves were Apollonian and ordered, therefore they didn't need a government structure to keep them ordered. So that's why it was able to work so well.
Because they had a strong moral foundation within their culture.
And religion.
Yes.
Yeah.
And their culture was dynamic enough to change.
To overpower the chaotic nature of the government.
Not only overpower the chaotic nature of not just the government, but of the environment they lived in.
Mm-hmm.
But also just to adapt to it.
Yeah.
To find new things to do. To become fur traders.
Right.
Because there's not much to do. Or loggers. Or just say, screw it. I'm just going to travel as far as I can possibly go. Because I can.
Right. And when you're looking at this specific thing, right? Crap. I'm trying to remember what I was going to say. So, rewind a little bit.
Like what we were just talking about?
Yeah.
So, we just sort of wrapped up. I mean, there's a lot more to go into on why the United States is a far more dynamic culture and how that worked really well because the people were very Apollonian, as you'd put it. They were very ordered. They were very their culture had a very strong moral basis.
Which is, now I remember what I was going to say. So, and it's important to recognize when you have a culture which individuals buy into without like something else telling them to. So they for the most part, the early Americans were Anglo Christians, Anglo-Protestant essentially.
Yes.
So they're from England and they're Protestant. Now, you see government get bigger and bigger as you have an influx of different cultures. You have, when the Irish came, there were a lot of early Irish that came to the United States, but they were all Protestant. They were all Puritans as well.
There was no Catholics.
Right, the Catholics Irish came after the potato famine for the most part.
I guess
that's when the biggest wave came, and once you have an influx of them, that is a different religion because Catholicism, a slightly different culture. So you have to increase the size of the government because culture is no longer going to dictate what you do.
Now you have more culture to mediate.
Exactly.
Now you have two cultures to mediate. Because before it was generally everyone agreed on most of the same basic stuff, and it was just the application that needed mediating.
Yeah.
Which is really basic, which leads to a very efficient, dynamic system that can adjust its application to whatever the environment throws at it.
Right.
And then you add another culture in there, and now your government has to mediate.
You're creating more chaos that needs order.
Your government has to mediate between the friction between two cultures, as well as the friction between these cultures and the outside world.
Right, and that continuously grows with more with an influx of more different cultures. So you start off, you have the Irish immigration, and then you have the Italians in the early 20th century, I think, around World War One,
the initial European wave of immigration.
Oh no, Italians. So when the
initial European, so it was Italians and it was
Germans, Poles.
It wasn't quite.
I think the Germans and Poles might have been a little bit earlier, but the reason I just mentioned the Italians. So when you think of the mafia, the Sicilian mafia, so Sicily, if you're to be specific, that was all around 1917. A lot of Italians and
late 18th,
Sicilians,
early 19th century.
Yeah, but interesting. A lot of them came in like around 1917. So like a lot of the big crime lords, the mafia bosses, were born in Italy, and because the Italian
family immigrated then.
Mm-hmm. And they came here as really young kids. Funny enough, slight side comment. I think it was Lucky Luciano, who was I think one of the main founders of the commission of the five families in New York. He actually to create a plea deal with the Americans for him to return to the United States because he was banned to go back to Sicily. And during World War II, when we were planning the invasion of Sicily, because Mussolini had kicked out the mafia, he actually worked with the American government to get the mafia to
His
sort of
deal was so that let me go back to Sicily.
Get to the U.S.
Oh,
you want to go back to the U.S.
Okay.
So he had the local mafias help the American invasion of Sicily.
Wild.
Right? So that's kind of crazy. Because Mussolini was the only person who was able to successfully defeat the mafia, which was crazy. Like, if you want to talk about one of the impressive things Mussolini did, getting rid of the mafia. You know how rooted they were into Sicilian culture? Like, they were so deep.
Rooted enough to move to a different continent and different culture, different cultural
and still
environment, and still maintain almost the same level of power, influence, and wealth.
Yeah, over those immigrant communities of Italians or Sicilians specifically. So it's really interesting that Mussolini was able to do that, and then because Mussolini did that, they're like, all right, we're gonna help the Americans, And chaos is good for the mafia. The mafia wants chaos, so create a little chaos, get rid of the ordered government, Yep. But anyway, so more groups come in, more cultures.
There's more friction. There's more things to mediate. Because now you have more you also have different values.
Yeah.
And you have to tell this new group of people that their values need to be able to operate in the same system as everybody else's values.
Yeah.
We will not just simply completely change the system for you. So there has to be a
compromise.
There has to be a give and take from both the government and then the cultural group. Yeah. The cultural group is willing to
assimilate to a certain extent.
Not do whatever insane shit their culture likes to do.
Well, like for example, a lot of cultures come from especially Islamic cultures come from a place where you can have multiple wives. So when they immigrate here, they have to keep one main wife, and the other one kind of lives in the family. It's like a weird. No, it's a weird little dynamic thing that happens, but something like that.
Or you could just go. I mean, Christians were at this point pretty done killing non-Christians in North America. Killing. Like crusade type shit.
Oh yeah, crusades had ended long before. Yeah. Last crusade was probably in like the 1300s or 1400s.
Islam is barely stopping doing that in the last 40 years.
No, it was a resurgence though, because
yes, under the resurgence, it's in.
Because look, you have the
Iran is a really good example of this. For a while, Iran was actually very progressive in the European sense. Yeah, that they had a bunch of women's rights. It was
under the Shah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was because they turned back into a theocracy.
Yes.
That wrecked everything.
Well, if you look at look at the Arab nationalism. I know Iran's not Arab, but we're talking about the Islamic world. So after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, you have a growth of nationalism, and since all these countries were split on uneven tribal lines, they needed nationalism to unite all these contending tribes. Now, more recently, you see a rise of Sunni Islamic separatism. So, for example, Iraq is actually made up mainly of Shias, but Saddam was the president, so you have a conflict between the Shias and the Sunnis. Obviously, ISIS was all Sunni, and they wanted to create a Sunni empire. And you have Syria. The Syrian rebels are predominantly Sunni, and the supporters of Assad are all the religious minorities. All the Shias, Islamic minorities, the Christians, they all support Assad. So you needed a sort of secular nationalistic identity to unify all these fracturing tribes. So Islam only more recently has this sort of resurgence of Islamic separatism been regained. I think the invasion of Afghanistan actually helped that because all the jihadists came together. Yeah. And they all networked.
And also now, not only are they networking and getting together and working together, but now in a cultural sense, you have a cultural wound from a secular Western European government.
Yeah. An atheist government. Soviet Union was atheist.
Well, Soviet Union, and then you can just go to the United States right after that.
Sure, but...
and Britain.
Yeah.
On top of that. So they culturally already don't have you can't expect them to have a good disposition towards any European country that says they're coming in here for a good reason to do anything in their nation.
Right. And, again, it all comes down to, like, I guess what we're getting at here is order. That's a perfect example. In the Islamic world, order was necessary to deal with all these contending cultures and religions, right? I look at Libya. Libya is not a real country in the sense that Libya only exists with the borders it does because of European colonization. Yeah. Because there's like, if you look at Libya today, there's like 3 major factions, a bunch of little ones. Gaddafi was able to create a Libyan national identity which unified people regardless of tribal or religious lines. So that was able to work for a little while.
I mean, that's how you...
Yeah, through order.
That's how you run a multicultural state at all.
You need order.
You also, not only do you require order, but you require a national identity.
Yeah.
If you lack a national identity, your multicultural society won't function because it doesn't have a culture. It has multiple cultures.
Yeah, so you need something that unifies all the cultures. And if not a national identity, you can have like an imperial identity. Yeah. So like Rome, for example. Even look at the British Empire. Not so much within their African or British colonies, but if you look at the Canadians and the Australians and New Zealanders, it's like we're fighting for the king and the queen.
Yeah, for a while they did have that.
They're bought into
empirical.
Imperial.
Yeah.
Empirical
is like objective. Imperial culture.
Yeah.
Look, man, I've been up for a long time.
That's all right. Well, or even like Rome, that's funny because that also ended up being their downfall because they ended up relying too much upon like the native Roman population was like decadent and didn't want to join the army, so they had to like recruit from different places. That's a separate argument, but you need order and you need some sort of identity that unifies contending identities. You need a cohesive identity.
You need a meta identity.
Yeah, like religion's really good for
you want to use a fancy word? You need a meta identity above all the other identities that you hold to make sure that everybody agrees on at least the base things and that we're all moving in the same direction.
Yeah, well this boils down to like, and I've talked about this before on some of my videos, identity ranges from like what I call, so I say range starts with yourself, your family, your community, your city, your country or culture, and then it goes to humanity as a whole and like life in general. Like we have a connection to the trees and other animals. But then you think though, all right, well how am I going to find an identity that transcends these sort of things and encapsulates everything? So like religion for a long time in Europe, at least, like was the commonality in Europe was Catholicism for like the medieval era.
That's why the Pope was a mediator.
Yes, the Pope was very powerful.
Like the I don't remember the name. I don't remember the name of this treaty. Yeah. But the treaty between Portugal and Spain on how to divvy up the world.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Who'd they go to? The Pope.
Sure. Well, like, and the Holy Roman Empire was always in contention with the Pope because they would set up anti-popes. So they tried to set up their own Pope to replace that Pope because, like, whoever held the Pope held the authority.
There was an instance of the main instance of 2 popes that I know about was one was in Spain, and one was in Rome. And then they all fought it out.
Oh yeah, there's probably a Habsburg-backed Pope then if it was in Spain. Because I remember Spain was like ruled by the Habsburgs for a little bit, a certain period of time, and the Habsburgs a lot of times fought with the.
There's a big gap in my European history.
Well, it's all cool.
It's all cool stuff. But
fuck. What was I gonna mention?
The point is, you need that next layer of identity to maintain these lower ones and prevent the lower levels of identity from just quarreling and then just destroying the whole society, or just doing their own thing and nobody operates in any sense of unity. Thus you just have an unproductive, ununified nation.
Right. And really quick, just before we move on, this is something I thought about. So this is a quick nice little base story about Napoleon. So Napoleon was so audacious that right after the French had decided to get rid of the monarchy and establish a republic, he's like, he takes dictatorial control of the French Republic, and he's like, all right, I'm not just going to make myself dictator. I'm not just going to make myself the king. I'm going to declare myself emperor of all the French, just like Charlemagne did. Now, Charlemagne is famous for, the famous scene of Charlemagne is him being crowned by the Pope.
Yeah.
And crowned Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Emperor.
That's the
Emperor
biggest,
of the
It's
Franks.
the biggest goddamn title in all of Europe.
Right. And then what did Napoleon do?
Holy Roman Emperor right
Yeah.
there.
But essentially, Napoleon wanted to do the same thing. And everyone thought he was crazy. That after France became a republic, you're going to bring it back to a monarchy. And on top of that, you're going to ask to be endorsed by the Pope. Everyone's like, the Pope's not going to come do that. Fuck no. And not just that, he came to the Notre Dame. And he crowns Napoleon Emperor.
Notre Dame?
Yes, in Notre Dame. I've been to Notre Dame, so
have I.
I didn't know that when I went. So
Neither
it's cool
did
that I know now. So, but now we know.
That's a cool.
Yeah.
I'll remember that.
So he crowns. The Pope crowns him,
Mm-hmm.
and then he gets a crown. He crowns his like wife, and it's just the most base thing ever. He has this fucking imperial laurel. Like it was literally like golden laurel, the same way Julius Caesar.
Is that?
That's a famous picture.
That's where the famous painting.
Yeah.
Picture. That's the
Sure.
famous painting.
Yeah.
No, they just
No.
kind of like.
Yeah, they took a picture.
Leave Napoleon. Click. But that's where the famous painting of him with the golden olive leaves.
Yeah.
Looking like a fucking Caesar.
Yep. Badass shit, right? I just wanted to mention that story
That's
because I
a
thought
neat
it was
story.
cool. But
Mentioning it.
what else?
Now, let's see.
We're just talking
We're
about
on
order,
something.
how
You
order
were-
is necessary to deal with contending identities, and how you need more laws when you have cultural disagreements. Because culture essentially is custom of like what is right or wrong. How do I interact socially? And when you disagree on that, you need the law to mediate the societal or the cultural differences.
You also need the law to function with your if you have a national culture.
Yeah.
Right. So like take the Chinese for example.
Sure.
The Han Chinese is the national cultural identity of all of China.
Yeah.
And their laws reflect that.
Mm-hmm.
Everything they do, everything is all lending itself to being, this perfect kind of not really communist, but
It's really imperial.
Imperial, right?
It's like Chinese
subservient Han Chinese.
It's so dynastic.
Civilian. Yes.
Literally, Confucianism is all about filial piety and like this ordered identity in society. Everything in the Chinese identity is rooted behind this sort of subservience to the higher authority, which is the state.
And that no wonder they fell right back into another authoritarian regime because their culture has been exclusively authoritarian regimes for thousands of years.
Well, look at Russia. Why is Russia like that? Same thing.
Same thing.
It's different than China. But it's a similar idea.
But it's pretty much the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Well,
just didn't last as long.
It's just a different structure. Like China's more centralized in their authoritarianism.
Yeah, because Russia was feudalist.
Yeah, they have
more decentralized.
And they have oligarchs today, which kind of function in a similar way.
As lords almost.
Yeah, kind of, right? Whereas China, there's not really this idea of oligarchs. Like Xi Jinping.
There used to be.
When?
Like there was so the government structure of China.
Mm-hmm.
If you really look at how when the chips are down, right? The big assembly of people doesn't matter. The secondary small assembly of people barely matter.
Mm-hmm.
The actual group of people that matter is 9 guys.
And which time period?
And they just it was after Mao's death until Xi Jinping took.
Oh yeah. Well, that's after Mao.
It was 9 guys who sat on a committee. I don't remember the name of this committee. A lot of them are dead now.
Mm-hmm. Like I bet this is like Deng Xiaoping's time frame.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He was one of those guys.
Okay.
On that committee, and the committee
because they're afraid of absolute power in one person.
And they pick themselves, and they have term limits and stuff. And it's all like fake, as if like the General Assembly picked it, but it's
an oligarchy.
They were an oligarchy.
Yeah.
They were an oligarchy for a while.
But it didn't last because that's not how Chinese system works.
No, their culture always lends itself
to one person.
To an autocracy.
And one of the reasons why a lot of the political elite that directly served the emperors of China were all eunuchs. Mm-hmm. Because, well, if you're a eunuch, then you have no continuation. You're just going to serve that individual. And there's no real prospect of having individual power because there's no point. If you're not going to sleep with women, what's the point of being powerful?
This was also a reason why empresses were allowed to have consorts if they were a eunuch.
Yeah, because they couldn't get them pregnant.
Can't get them pregnant. You can't have kids, but sure, go have your pleasure. It doesn't matter.
Dude, they can't even get hard.
Yeah, they can. Because it's not testosterone that does that.
Ah, fair enough. Anyway. But then, would they even enjoy it if they're a eunuch?
I mean, you still have nerves.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a eunuch, so I wouldn't know.
But also, does it matter? They're a servant with no balls.
That's true.
Wouldn't you sleep with the empress?
Yeah, but what if I just didn't care at all? Like, if you're asexual, you're not going to care no matter how hot someone is. It's not going to matter.
she's probably just gonna make you do other things.
I know,
What
but
are
I'm
you-
saying,
come
you know,
on.
whatever. Let's not discuss this.
This isn't important right now. Why are you talking about this?
You're fueling the fire, my friend. Anyway, so, you know, Russia, China, you know, different forms of authoritarianism, but they both lend they lend their support to authoritarian structures.
You need to. The point in bringing this up is that take America. America does not lend itself towards authoritarian, and the only way to get authoritarian is to disguise it.
Yeah.
That's really the only way to do it.
And it has happened, but it's still a disguise.
Yeah, and that's the same with a lot of these Western European countries.
I don't know.
Kind of. It's not. I don't think it's deep enough in Eastern Europe.
Well, Eastern Europe, there's Eastern Europe, there's still a very authoritarian history, but I would say, generally speaking, yeah, there is a lot of bureaucratic corruption in Europe, but I think that there's less of there's more transparency in the United States, I would say. Because look in the parliamentary system, when you have such a different array of political parties, you have to form coalition governments.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
there's more transparency than a two-party system, which there's no overlap of political thought. You know, like it's just you get branched into these two frames of mind, and I think that's because ultimately what people don't realize is the political elite of the United States has been the same since its inception. It's Anglo-European Protestants.
Yeah,
and people don't realize it. That is.
I think people do. But I think they take the wrong analysis from that.
Sure. Well,
because they realize it, and then they take all of the problems that this society has, and they just blame it on that group of people.
Or no, what they do is they blame it on white people.
Yeah.
But they don't realize that there's so like the Anglo-Protestants hated the Irish, they hated the Italians, they hated all the other white people that came to this country and were poor. It's not a white people thing. It's specifically Anglo-Protestant.
I mean, the Catholics have a good amount of cultural sway now.
No, not really. Why do you think the only real Catholic president, because Biden's not a real Catholic president, let's not pretend here. There's not a Catholic bone in his body.
No, the only real Catholic president was JFK.
And what happened to him? No, literally, no. Look at the CIA files. It doesn't completely point to that, but there's suggestions, right? And also in 1961, the Waldorf Astoria. Did I not tell you about this? He had a speech speaking out against secret societies.
Yeah,
the Waldorf Astoria. Okay, good. Let's make sure.
So, he made a whole speech saying that he thinks secrecy is repugnant, and secrecy is horrible. Secret societies are horrible, and even more than that, he wanted and planned on
more transparency.
Not only more just disbanding the CIA. Eventually. That's what he wanted to do.
And what happened? Dude, let's look at the Frankfurt School. You familiar with the Frankfurt School at all?
No.
So it's a... I'm gonna totally misdescribe them, so I need to just... Let me just look at the... Yeah. Because I know the functions of Frankfurt School was, but I need to... Alright, so it's a school of social theory and critical philosophy. So basically a think tank, a philosophical think tank.
Yeah, that's just a big think tank. What are some of the names in it? What are the members?
Let's pull it up.
Let's take a look.
Dude.
Notable theorists?
Okay, I don't really know any of these guys. Wait, is that Carl Schmitt? No, is it Alfred Schmidt? I was going to say, why would Carl Schmitt be there? But anyway, that's not the important part. Yeah, Carl Schmitt would never be a part of this thing. This thing was purely, and you can read here, advanced capitalism, anti-positivism, communicative rationality, critical theory, culture industry.
Critical theory?
It's a different kind. But
that would be modern. What is modern? Would it not be the same inception? When was this around?
This was way earlier. But the Frankfurt School was utilized. This is something I've heard. I don't know if this is true, but from what I heard, because of this sort of more liberal capitalist democracy, the philosophical backings of liberal capitalist democracy are supported within the Frankfurt School.
Frankfurt School, known more appropriately as critical theory.
Oh, okay.
So this is where it came from.
Oh, I thought you were talking about critical race theory.
Well, critical race theory comes from critical theory.
Yeah, I got to do more research. I don't know enough about it.
The concept of critical theory as a whole is it takes... I talk about this too much because it's horrible. But I just hate talking about it because it's such a horrible way of analyzing the world. Yeah. It essentially takes all of the West and the way the West functions, and it's going to break it down and subjugate it out over different subjects, topics, and perspectives, and then just criticize the entire thing. Just break it all down.
Nice.
Destroy it all. That's the concept.
Very cringe.
That's the layman's terms. The more complicated way of the way they'll phrase it is it's a means of analyzing Western culture, history, through the lenses of race, gender, sex, sexuality, and politics.
Sounds so cool. Anyway, Having said that,
Anyway,
you'll be happy to hear my criticism of the Frankfurt School. I've heard that the Frankfurt School was utilized because of its philosophy supportive of liberal capitalist democratic systems, that they were utilized to combat communism, for example, during the Cold War by the CIA, and that they're funding a specific worldview to dominate other worldviews. Kind of goes back to the whole ESG thing, like supporting certain things that benefit you. Except in this case, it was the state.
Yeah,
utilizing
it's pretty straightforward.
institution.
It's the state creating almost a state-funded philosophical.
That was fascist
ideology.
That's fascism. When a state utilizes an institution over another institution for its own gain, that is fascism.
Yeah, but if the CIA was doing it it's true that the CIA was doing it with the Frankfurt School.
Yeah, that's fascism.
Yeah.
No, I'm just saying because when we did a live stream, I criticized.
Jordan
Peterson,
like what's the definition?
Because Jordan Peterson called ESG fascist, but it's the opposite of fascist. Because fascism is when the state interferes with like non-government institutions.
Not when the corporate interferes with the state.
Yeah, exactly. So when the corporate interferes with the state, that's like kind of hyper-capitalist. Yeah. I guess. And when the state interferes with like corporations or like the education system, whatever, that is fascism essentially. Yeah. But of course, it's not just fascism. Because the
distinction seems to come down to which side of the docket, if you will, which side of the fence holds the sway. Is it corporate over government, or is it government over corporate?
Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, so yeah, that's just why I mentioned the Frankfurt School. Mm-hmm. But why the overall message I'm trying to make is that there is a specific identity which is kind of made up the political elite that people sort of ignore. Like, here's another thing: people that are like, and I'm always like supportive of like questioning things, but I think one of the reasons why people like you take like anti-Semitic people like Kanye West, for example. Well, it's not a good example because he's not even smart about it. But you just take anti-Semitism in general. One of the issues, like even you take people who are anti-Semitic and aren't just crazy like Kanye and they try to back it up. My issue with them is that they're not also giving an equal blame towards Anglo-Protestant. Because if you think about it, I was looking this up because I was thinking when the whole Kanye thing was going about and like everyone was arguing about it, you have your supporters against anti-Semitism and you have your more anti-Semitic people. I was like, all right, I'm gonna look this up, and what I came to realize is the anti-Semitic argument would be that like Jews have had a monopoly on like banks,
had a disproportionate control of like banking and different industries,
and
especially finances, politics, etc.
Right. And they don't approach this in a very like you can respectfully say and like interesting. Yeah. So when Ben Shapiro was being interviewed by Lex Fridman, Ben Shapiro was like, yes, there are more like Jewish people in Hollywood than their representation in the population. Yes, there are more Jews as lawyers or in the financial sectors, but it doesn't mean that there's some sort of conspiracy. No. Right? Obviously, conspiracies could exist, but it doesn't mean that.
It's statistically true that there's more.
Right, but it doesn't prove that there's a conspiracy.
No.
There could be, but it doesn't prove that. So you can't use it as an argument to like hate Jewish people. It makes no sense.
You can't just be like, hey, it's a lot of Jews around here.
That is it.
That's not an argument. Right. It's not a logical argument.
Right. That's just like it's a logical fallacy. It's a kind of
it's a correlation, not causation.
Right. Now,
not even correlation. Really.
No, not exactly, but I know where you're going with that.
It's similar. It's like a parallel concept, but it's not correlation.
Yeah.
It's not.
Like it's still here's the thing: you can't be too opposed to the truth that you deny that that's reality, but you can't be too hungry for a certain truth that you just jump to conclusions and become anti-Semitic based on that. Yeah. Now, the reason I bring it up though is because as I was doing my research to kind of see if these claims were true, I realized that a lot of the biggest industrialists and financial bankers follow a similar lineage, and that's they came to America a long time ago, Anglo-American Protestants. Like the Rockefellers, J.P. Morgans. Actually, J.P. Morgan, I think, was a more recent immigrant, but Protestant. He was Protestant.
J.P. Morgan? Yeah.
Yeah. He might have been more... Let me just double check, because I don't think he was in...
There's like two lineages of a lot of modern banks, and that's... you've got like the Goldman Sachs of the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which was originally from a Jewish man.
Yeah.
However, then you have the J.P. Morgan side, which is a younger.
Okay, no, I was right. He does come from that, because Connecticut. People in New England generally have been there for a long time, so he comes from that Anglo-Protestant tradition. And also Morgan's a very English name.
Yeah, it's extremely English.
So I guess what I'm getting at is, if you're going to try to use that if you're going to try to use that as an argument for anti-Semitism, like saying, oh, well, Jews are overrepresented here, you also have to look at, well,
who were all of the most wealthy, powerful, and influential people of their times.
Yes.
And although, a lot of them were Jewish, especially in the financial sector.
A lot of them were also...
A lot of them
were Anglo-American Protestants. And they actively tried to dissuade, or not dissuade, but repress Catholics from being in positions of influence, because they felt... This was their argument, and it's total... There might be some truth to it, but I don't agree with it. Overall, their argument was that if you let Catholics in positions of power, the Pope is going to influence American politics, which I think is kind of stupid. It makes sense to a certain degree. I think that would have been true.
Maybe then.
That would have been true. No, because it would have been true in like the medieval time frame, or even like the Renaissance. But you have to realize, Catholics only started making up a major part of the American population after the potato famine, after like the 1850s, 1860s. By that time, the Pope really didn't have a lot of moral authority. So that's why I think it's a bad argument. And I think it was just a sort of prejudice against Catholic people.
Yeah.
But you have to look at the big picture. You also have to look at, there's overrepresentations of various races. Like, are you going to be racist against like Chinese people or Indian people because they make up a big part of like tech jobs? Are you going to be racist against Catholic people because like maybe during the potato famine, most of the industrial jobs, factory jobs were Catholics? Just because of the Irish population happened to be the lower working class population at the time. I'm just saying there's always going to be, there's never going to be complete equality of representation in terms of ethnicity. There's always going to be some, there's always going to be some difference. But
as long as you have any sense of free choice, you'll have a disproportionate outcome.
Yeah.
It's just how it's going to be. You cannot, it was back to chaos and order again, right?
Yeah.
Because as long as you have any chaos in a society, which you're going to have, because humans in and of themselves, humans are chaotic. Mm-hmm. We make decisions that you cannot fully explain and that you cannot fully understand or predict. Mm-hmm. So we already have chaos with us, and then you have everything else around us in the environment, and you have millions of us. Mm-hmm. So there's already going to be chaos and variables that you cannot control. You're going to have disproportionate outcomes.
Yeah.
Even if everybody starts at the exact same point, you're going to have disproportionate outcomes.
Yeah, because like everyone always starts the same in a race, but the fastest person wins the race.
Yeah.
So
same thing.
And like, having said all that though, I'm not denying that any conspiracy could be true, but a lot of the times people that buy into conspiracy theories don't do their due diligence. So like people that come to these big conclusions about racial stuff, for example.
They never the race stuff.
They never do research. And a lot of times here's the problem though, right? So like people are so gullible that if like someone decides they want to be anti-Semitic and they just say something like Jews have an overrepresentation in the financial industry, right? Yeah. If they say that, here's the problem with the whole... Well, wait, let me just finish my point.
I'll let you finish.
Because I'm going to lose track.
You might say what I'm going to say.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Here's the thing. If like, let's say like some far-right people say Jews are overrepresented in Hollywood or like the media or the financial sector, they'll say that. And they'll say that because their argument is that there's some sort of Jewish conspiracy. That's their argument. Now, the problem is when the left or like the more, progressive people say, no, that's not true. If they go back against that and they say, no, that's not true, they're not overrepresented. The moderate person is going to look at that exchange and they're going to be like, well,
why is the guy in the extreme right?
Exactly. So despite the fact that...
Why is the conspiracy theorist right? Why are you denying what he said?
Exactly. So while it's true, they have a high representation in certain industries, despite making up a smaller part of the population, that is true. What's not true is the conclusion of that, which is that they have some conspiracy to keep other people down or whatever. So the point is that if you try if you push back against speech like that and you say no, that's not true. They don't overrepresent, and then it turns out, okay, well, they do have more. Then the more moderate person might be pulled towards anti-Semitism.
Exactly, which is why you need that mediator. This is something that was brought up in that Vivek interview that we live streamed.
Yeah,
they discussed how free speech is a mechanism to mediate disagreement.
Exactly, because then through free speech, you talk to someone who's anti-Semitic, you talk to someone on the far left.
Disagreements in culture, in ideology, in beliefs, morals, anything.
Yeah,
that is the ultimate mediator. Is just the ability to say what you want without endangering the lives of other people.
Because if you try to silence someone, you essentially add legitimacy to their argument. So if you try to silence, let's say you try to silence like a racist person, you add legitimacy because you're saying like, oh, if you're too afraid to have them speak, what if they're right? But if you let them speak, like let's say I have a conversation with a racist person, and I deconstruct their arguments, then everyone can see that they're wrong. Right?
Yeah.
So if you deny someone their right to speak, you're never going to know if they're right or wrong. So some people might say, well, this person's not allowed to speak. Maybe they're right. Right? And then this also applies to free speech because it starts off with trying to censor hate speech. But then it goes on to try to censor just disagreement in general.
Yes.
Like you see the deplatforming of people who aren't racist,
It's slow, but it's a constant march. Unless you have a constant force pushing back on that, it's a constant push towards one singular viewpoint is allowed.
And that's how like fascism and communism work. So basically, I'm gonna use both examples. First of all, in communism, you had different factions within the Communist Party. You had your more social liberals who were like they were communists but they didn't support an autocracy. You had Mensheviks, you had the Bolsheviks, which ended up triumphing. You had different factions of communism. Now first they say, okay, we're gonna silence all the tsarists, we're gonna silence all the royalists.
Yeah, they start with the bourgeois.
Yeah,
right?
So
they use the bourgeois. They kill all the czars.
And then it goes to, well, the nationalists are in contention, so we're going to kick out the nationalists. Then it goes to the Democrats support a free democracy. We're going to kick them out. Then they start kicking out other communists. And look, same with fascism. In Nazi Germany, first thing they did was, so the Enabling Act happened after the Reichstag was supposedly burned down by communists. It was, but then you say, well, maybe they knew about it ahead of time. So it was burned down by communists. But what you could say is like Pearl Harbor. We knew Pearl Harbor was going to happen, but then we used that as a justification to enter World War II. Same thing with the...
This is a Winston Churchill quote. Never let a tragedy go to waste.
There we go. Exactly what they did. So they might have known the guy was going to burn down the Reichstag, but they're like, okay, now once the Reichstag...
Let him, because this is a chance for us to get rid of the communists.
Exactly. So that's what they did.
That's exactly what
they did. So then they made the Communist Party illegal. So first they get rid of the communists. Then they get rid of the Social Democrats. Then... So you have this movement called the German Conservative Revolution in Germany, which was actually quite an interesting movement, and I think there's a lot of merit to them. So you have figures like Ernst Jünger, Oswald Spengler. First of all, they weren't anti-Semitic, they weren't racist, they were nationalist, and they were more right-wing. But like I said, they weren't racist or anti-Semitic, so they disagreed fundamentally with the Nazis. But
they had to go eventually.
So at first
they supported up into a certain point, and so you get rid of all the other dissenters, and now the only people that have to go are the people who agree with you on like a few things.
So that's my point. So it starts off with you sign. So it goes both ways. It goes from like, you can have a racist that's silencing non-racist, but then it goes the opposite way. If you have someone that's so like anti-racist that they I'm serious that they
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
that's why I laugh.
You start silencing people. Like Kanye, for example, you start silencing people you deem racist. Okay, most people would agree on that. But then it goes from that to you start silencing, for example, let's say ultra-libertarians or anarchists that want no state at all. They don't want to pay taxes. You start censoring the people that don't want taxes. And people are like, well, I guess we do want taxes. So I guess it's fine.
Taxes are useful to the government, right?
So they're kind of like, And then it goes to if somebody is traditionally conservative. They're like, oh, well, traditional conservatism doesn't work. We have to be tolerant of all people. Right. And they get silenced. And now everyone's like, wait a minute.
Wait a second now.
Wait a minute. Why are we deplatforming?
Paradigm. Why are we doing this?
Right, but it's a slow... It starts off...
very slow.
Yeah, it starts off with, like, things most people will agree on. But if you even if you get rid of that, then what's to stop you from getting rid of everything?
If you want to see a very recent example of a democratic nation just slowly falling to tyranny, it's Canada right now.
Yeah. Look at everything Justin Trudeau's going. So
you could just go back. The thing Jordan Peterson got famous for was like
the transgender stuff.
The law that compels you to you are compelled, so legally forced, to use a transgender person.
Yeah, that's what got him famous.
And that's what got Jordan Peterson famous.
It's when he had that talk at that
he had like a whole bunch of these talks, and he was what he's attempting to explain is that he's okay to use someone's pronouns.
Yeah, but he shouldn't be forced to.
But it's compelled speech.
And that's how I feel.
And then you have, and then this evolves over time. Because when the pandemic came in, you had the truckers.
Yeah.
The whole truckers, not march, but
it was a drive.
It was a drive.
No, it was called the Freedom Convoy or something.
Yeah, the convoy, right? The truckers convoy. And what did Canada do? They froze their bank accounts.
Yeah.
They tried to
It's so fucking illegal.
Any form, not in Canada.
I mean, like, it should be illegal.
Well, yeah, but they have. That's the beauty of their system is they have no constitution and no document that says you have any right to that.
No checks and balances.
Yeah, it's all government.
Yeah.
And then one of the more recent things they did, this was still like almost a year ago, is they banned almost all firearms.
Handguns recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's almost impossible to own a firearm in Canada.
And
now, more recently than that, they just gave government permission to look through all of your internet activity. Yes.
Really? That's so stupid.
I just learned about this like yesterday.
That's crazy. We should do a video on that.
I need to do more research to it, but yes.
Yeah, we'll do it. So it's like a little short live stream or something.
They allowed the government to just look into what your activity is online.
Yeah. I didn't even know that. That's pretty
Which is like, is already, if you know how to do it, it's already pretty easy. But like, privacy is kind of a lie already online. Yeah. But to give the government that authority.
Right. Because right now it's like private companies can sell cookies to the government.
I'm not saying that they will be guaranteed to be authoritarian. But they have done all of the same things that authoritarian nations do.
Yeah.
They are clamping on free speech. They have already proven a literal example that they are perfectly fine censoring opposition. They have removed firearms, which is the classic.
Yeah. And
now they're allowing the government to search your personal activities.
Yeah.
Which in the online space, what does that really amount to? It's what you're looking up, it's what you're reading, it's who you're watching, who you're listening to.
Yeah, they could get in trouble for watching us.
What you're tweeting, what you're putting out on Instagram, Facebook, whatever.
Yeah.
If they can monitor all that, they're only like a mass CCTV system away from having what China has.
Yeah. It's pretty wild.
Like it's slow. It didn't happen like really, because it never does.
Yeah.
Even in Nazi Germany, it wasn't really overnight. They were centralizing power for a while, and then was it the Reichstag? Yeah. That was just the.
Well, that was the first thing. That wasn't the final
that was the first thing?
So they achieved power.
Because when did he take emergency power?
Yeah, so basically 1933, January 1st, 1933 is when he was so he wasn't elected chancellor.
No, he was elected.
He wasn't elected.
He was appointed.
He was appointed chancellor because what happened is every time the president Paul von Hindenburg picked a chancellor, the Nazi government walked out of the Reichstag, so it had to force another election, and they kept getting more and more votes in these emergency elections. They kept stalling the government. It was essentially a government shutdown until they appointed. So they appointed.
Filibustered the election.
Yeah.
Just to get Hitler to be chancellor.
Yeah. So each time, Paul von Hindenburg, after the first chancellor, he tried to pick another one, and then eventually they all right, we're gonna give it to Hitler. Now he became chancellor in January of 1933, and then I think a month or two later was the Reichstag fire, and through the Reichstag fire, he got rid of the communists, he got rid of freedom of press, and then over time he's slowly getting rid of. And I think the real solidification of power was called the Night of the Long Knives. That's where he got. So before the SS, you have the SA. Yeah. And they were the paramilitary organization, the paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party, and their leader Ernst Röhm. He was more of a socialist than the regular Nazis. He was more of a. He was more
more on that National Socialist side of things, not National Socialist side of things.
That's so confusing. Yeah, I know what you mean though. Yeah, he was more towards the socialist side. So
if you don't know, the Nazis stands for National Socialist, which means
National Socialist German Workers' Party.
Yeah, but
National Socialista Deutsche Arbeiterpartei.
all right, man. You're lucky you're Filipino, bro. You're so lucky. I couldn't get away with that shit. I got blue eyes and blonde hair.
You're Jewish, you get away with it.
Okay, that's kind of fair. So, they, like all socialists or collectivists, I think is a more apt term.
Yeah, they weren't really socialists.
A better translation.
Corporatists is what I would call them.
Ought to be, I would say, collectivist.
They're racial socialists is what I would call them.
Yes, they're racial socialists. What they collectivized on was the race.
Yeah, that was their identity.
That's what that means.
Yeah, German identity was racial identity.
Is they collectivized the thing, the identity that their national identity was completely and solely derived from was the race.
Sure.
Was the German people.
Yeah. Anyway, that's not too important. So, I mean, it is, but like...
It is because you were just talking about someone who's more on the socialist side, which means they're more
but I mean, like...
on the collectivist side and not on the racial side.
Okay. Well, I'm getting at that.
It's important.
We're getting into, like, government cracking down on everybody.
Yes.
So, after that, the Name of the Long Knives, he got rid of Ernst Röhm because Ernst Röhm wanted a more socialist Germany. And he had a lot of power because he had the paramilitary wing. They were, like, as large as the army. So, Hitler executed the Night of the Long Knives, which got rid of any of the Nazis that weren't super supportive of Hitler's regime. So you start off with solidifying power by defeating your arch enemies, which are the communists, and you go all the way down to literally defeating people within your own party that don't agree with you. Yeah. So that's the danger of like getting rid of any speech, right? And like I said, if that person is wrong, then they'll prove themselves to be wrong through free speech, and if they happen to be right, then clearly they should have the right to speak. Yeah. Right? Because like I said,
but you can't say just off the initial of what they're saying,
right?
Unless what they're saying is like.
Inciting violence is generally what we consider.
That's the rule. Is inciting.
It's like yelling fire in a theater.
Intentionally inciting panic. Or intentionally inciting violence.
Yeah.
So if I tell people to go beat him up, specifically him.
Yeah, I would go to jail because I'm gonna beat the shit out of him.
Yeah, I could have charges pressed against me. For attempting to incite violence.
Right.
Or the classic, you run into a theater, you shout fire, and everyone panics.
And tramples each other.
Yeah. So you can't incite a panic, and you can't, like, intentionally an immediate... There's a lot of There's a lot of legalese when you get into it.
Legalities?
Like, I wouldn't just say legalities, but just a lot of, like, really, really specific definitions once you get into the constitutional law side of this. Mm-hmm. And it's been several years since I had a constitutional law class.
Yeah.
But I remember it being very complicated and very annoying.
I'm sure it was.
Actually, it was really fun.
I'm sure it was. Anyway, maybe we should start wrapping up soon.
Yeah, probably. We've covered,
Dude, it will be another podcast. Don't worry.
We've covered a lot.
There'll be another podcast, bud.
No, I'm saying we've covered, like, everything that, like, I put down that I wanted to cover here.
Yeah. We'll Order and Chaos will always kind of have a...
It always comes back up. It's a good shooting off point.
Well, just to summarize what we talked about. So we talked about the evolutionary roots of like the Dionysian chaotic side. We talked about how order was used to sort of tame this Dionysian side. We also saw how the Apollonian was used to tame the chaotic nature around them. So like in the Puritans' case, right? Like they were Apollonian and they had a chaotic government structure. That's why it worked. It balanced each other out. So we also talked about, in general, some certain aspects of evolutionary psychology.
Yeah.
We talk about tragedy and how that represents order and chaos, the Dionysian and the Apollonian. We talk about Carl Jung, the necessity to have a good relationship with violence, the cultural differences between America and China regarding order and chaos. Scroll down.
We even went through.
Talk about the mafia.
We talked a little bit of mafia, a little bit of
Islam.
We went into identity a bit and nesting identity is a neat term for it, or just identity as a whole, the whole concept.
Base Napoleon getting crowned by the Pope as Emperor of the French.
Russia and China.
The difference is between their leanings towards authoritarianism. The fact that many of the elites of this country have been Protestant, and that like how that relates to anti-Semitism. Because
doesn't mean that there's a Protestant conspiracy.
Yeah, no. We're just saying that it's an organic conspiracy.
Yes.
It just
we didn't even cover organic conspiracy.
Oh yeah, so just to briefly, we can talk about this a different time. We've kind of talked about it without using the word. Organic conspiracies are like something comes about organically. Like for example, if let's say a bunch of Irish Catholics end up dominating the coal mining industry, and it just happens because they happen to come to the country in a time where they need coal miners, that would be an organic conspiracy. So it's not like they all came together and decided to dominate coal mining.
Or
let's not spend too much time.
All right.
We're gonna wrap this
An
up.
organic conspiracy is there is no backrooms discussion or
Yeah.
agreement between any groups.
Right.
An organic conspiracy is it appears like a conspiracy.
Mhm.
It acts like a conspiracy, but that is because all parties involved
Mhm.
are simply behaving in their own interest.
Right. And that's the important distinction when you get to like racism, for example. People are racist thinking that these are just organic, like Protestant Anglo-Protestants becoming the political elite of this country, and then Jewish people becoming represented in like Hollywood or media or financial.
Or for a long
industry.
time it was a financially, less so now.
Yeah.
But it was.
Mm-hmm. All these things just happen naturally because, well, here's one thing. Jewish people in general just happen to be very gifted because if you think of the nature of the Jewish people, they were constantly dealing with oppression in every country they were at. Therefore, because of the suppression of Jewish people, they had to be more exceptional to survive.
Or the classic example of why did they dominate banking so much?
Mhm.
It's because a lot of the first bankers were Jewish.
Mhm.
Because it was illegal for Christians to lend money, but
Right.
not for Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And the entire basis of banking is lending money.
Yeah. So like
So it all came from them.
It's an organic thing. There was no like they didn't come together and say we're gonna dominate. It just
they didn't
happened.
come together and be like, we're gonna invent this thing called money.
Mm-hmm.
And we're gonna take this money
Mm-hmm.
and we're gonna give it to people and make them give more back to us,
Mm-hmm.
so that we control them through a thing called debt. Like that, it wasn't a conversation they had.
Yeah, no, it just happened.
It just happened.
Yeah.
It happened because they were operating in their own self-interest under their own cultural rules,
Mm-hmm.
and these cultural rules allowed them to excel in different ways.
And that's why it's not. That's the problem with anti-Semitism is people automatically think Jewish people are evil because
No, bro, they're just good at the
it
game.
just happens to be what happens, right? Like why are we like? And the same thing with like racism today when they say like all white people are evil, because whites happen. That's just how it happened.
Yeah, this is how it went.
Yeah.
Are you gonna say the same thing about Han Chinese?
Yeah, right? So it's like racism is oftentimes very stupid because of this reason,
Yeah.
Like, I think the only times that racism can be justified is if you say you are ignorant. If you say, I am ignorant. No.
you just were like, I don't know, man.
No. If you say, like, straight up.
You're like, your great uncle who's just like, I just hate Italians.
No. More like if you simply say, like, because I don't think you can ever morally justify racism.
No.
But if you
I don't think that's
if you neglect morality
rational.
and you say, like, oh, well, I just happen to want to live in a world where
you just
reject humanism and you say
you reject rationality.
it's like accepting a certain level of evil, saying like I don't care about it's like it's kind of like the power argument. So like you'd be like Genghis Khan, like I'm gonna spread Mongolian lineage. I'm just gonna murder and rape
lineage across the entire world if I can.
Yeah, it's not morally justified, but if you just say straight up like no, there's no basis to back this up. Because the problem with racism oftentimes today is that people try to act like a specific race is evil.
Yeah, they try and they either typically base it out of religion, history, like conspiracy, or like science, like eugenics.
Yeah, they try to morally or scientifically justify it, and there is no moral or scientific justification. And then sometimes there will be something that's slightly true, but then they'll misconstrue it. So, for example, like the whole financial thing, they'll misconstrue that fact and try to turn it into a conspiracy.
As a grand Jewish conspiracy to control the world through finances.
Right. So they'll spin those things, and so like the only way like a state can be straight up racist, I think, or even like straight up based on identity.
They can be straight up racist, but I think the only way they might be able to pull it off is if they're just straight up.
No, but look at Israel. Israel is an ethno-state, essentially. Now, it happens to be that Jewish people come from different ethnic backgrounds, but they don't allow Muslims the same rights as Jewish people within the state of Israel, despite the fact that Palestinian people were born
Their government
Israeli
is
land.
secular, though.
Technically, it's secular. But an ethno-state, it's an organic ethno-state.
That's a good point.
But they have actual policies which support the ethno-state.
They do?
Well, because Muslims aren't granted the same amount of political freedom as Jewish people are in the state of Israel.
The way they're not allowed to vote.
I'll have to look this up, but let's just
we I'm sure you're gonna wrap up.
Islamic. No.
Getting Israel Palestine.
Let's just do it really quick, because I'm not speaking out against Israel because if they're just protecting their own interests, but they're straight up about it, let me see. What's a better way to look this up?
I don't know.
Can Palestinians vote in Israel? That's a simple way to look
That is a very simple way to do it.
Yeah, see, they're not Israeli citizens, so they can't vote. So that's exactly my point. So Israel does this. They do racism. Let's not beat around the bush. This is a form of racism.
Yeah.
Because, and that's what I mean, but it's somewhat just. I'm not saying it's justified on a moral basis. It's wrong what they're doing, but they're not lying about it. They're just straight up like, we want to create a state that's only for Jewish people.
Yeah, they're like, no, we want a Jewish state.
Yeah, and
what do you want from us?
Yeah, they're transparent about it. They're
Yeah.
not pretending that they're morally right, but they have a reason. It's because, well,
And
Jewish
then
people have been oppressed throughout history.
It
so
helps. It helps that the powers that be put them there.
Yeah, but they've earned it. The Jewish people have fought hard to fight for
invaded.
Israel. No, yes, they would have been invaded by the Arabs if it wasn't for American.
No. What I mean is they've had
intervention,
some like rough.
Oh, yeah.
millennia.
But it is true that they would have.
Persecuted for like
Yeah.
every problem.
They would have
in Europe.
lost the Yom Kippur War, I think it was, if it wasn't for us, though. We saved them from being invaded by like Egypt and Syria and all. They were about to lose, but then we sent in our Air Force. But you know, they deserve a state. The Jewish
The more
people
you know.
have suffered so much that you can see a justification for Israel.
Yeah,
But it's still racist. I'm not going to pretend and be politically correct.
they are
here.
still racist.
The state of Israel is essentially functions as an ethno-state. But it's not morally justified. It's morally wrong. But it's also but what's morally wrong is the fact that it's not morally wrong that they want their own state. It's morally wrong that they don't afford Palestinians any rights, despite the fact that Palestinians were born there.
Yeah, and also
In
they do
Israeli
it
land.
very cleverly and underhandedly.
Mm-hmm.
Like their policy is underhanded, but they're not gonna deny the fact that they're discriminating against
Yeah.
Palestinians.
So I guess
it's pretty obvious when
Mm-hmm.
most Palestinians in the Israel-occupied territories live under Israeli occupation
Yeah.
and are not citizens.
Right.
Meaning they can't vote and they can't participate.
Yeah, but there's a reason why. It's because you don't want them to vote out the Jewish people.
No,
It
you
makes
want them to
sense.
vote out the
So here's the
Jews,
thing. So when I say that
obviously they're gonna
racism is
fight
never
you.
morally
Yeah.
right, but I can understand it when there's a practical reason for it. It doesn't make it morally right.
It doesn't make it morally right, but it's a
but-
strategic move you
Yeah,
can
you
make.
can understand why the state of
Yeah.
Israel is racist to a certain degree because it's the only way that they're going to survive.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there is no Jewish. It's like they say, if
So would you say like the a very similar thing to what the Chinese are doing?
no,
Because the Han Chinese,
because the Uyghurs.
well, the CCP is trying to make China.
Oh, are they
Han
racist?
Chinese
Yes, they are
again.
racist, but I don't think it's as justified as the Israel is justified.
Yeah, the Han Chinese haven't suffered.
Yeah. Also, they will survive. Like the Israel, if
Yeah,
Israel
the
laid down.
largest ethnic population on the
Yeah,
planet.
they'll be fine. Here's the famous saying, and like I have a lot of criticisms of Israel. Don't pretend I'm a shill of Israel. I have a lot of criticisms, but I have criticisms of Israel from the point of view of an American. If I was Israeli, I would fight and die for Israel because I understand why they're doing what they're doing. They're just supporting their own interests. The same way the Russians are supporting their interests in the Ukrainian war. Same way the Ukrainians are supporting their interests. Americans, like we all
We're
support our
supporting our
identities.
interests
Yeah.
in the Ukraine war.
Yeah, so I understand everyone's perspective, but for my interest, I have criticisms of Israel. But I'm not going to deny the fact that they have a right to self-determination because they've earned it.
Fuck shit.
Yeah, but look, if Palestine laid down their weapons tomorrow, there would still be a state of Palestine. If Israel laid down their weapons tomorrow, Israel would be wiped out
Yeah.
because they all hate them there. So
Yeah.
I'm just saying I understand both points of views.
Well,
No, they would. Come on, let's not beat around the bush here. They would be massacred by
I would-
Hezbollah
I
in
would-
Syria.
I would, yeah, because even if the nation states around them didn't, because of recent treaties and negotiations being signed, fucking Hezbollah would just fucking
Exactly. So
wipe them out.
just to clarify,
Palestine would kill them if Israel doesn't keep discriminating. That is the worst part about that conflict is that if
There's
one
no
of
good
them
guy.
if one of them attempts to stop,
Yeah.
the other will kill them.
yeah, but there's no good or bad
No,
people
not
in
really.
Palestine. The Palestinians have a reason to be angry at Israel,
Especially
and they have a
since-
reason to fight Israel,
especially
and
since-
Israel has a reason to fight back.
You get into like the really difficult side of like Palestine wasn't a country; it was owned by two other countries.
Yeah, but there's a unique national identity.
Yeah, there's like
identity,
the
which is
peoples
Palestine.
of that area,
Yeah.
the Levant,
Uh-huh.
but Palestinian
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
Like the same way that being Jewish was a thing.
I disagree.
Not to my understanding of the research. It
The
wasn't
Palestinian
like
people are rooted in the Philistines. Just look at the Bible. There's biblical backing to.
but
like,
the Philistines, but Philistine was destroyed.
yes,
And
but
they were scattered. That's why
were they scattered or were they assimilated into like a new identity?
Kind of both, because the Philistines were a part of the Sea Peoples.
Fair enough, that's true. They were like the Phoenicians, right?
They were one of the Sea Peoples, and I think there's like some...
that's true.
And then some of the Sea Peoples, I don't know if it was the Philistines
mm-hmm.
specifically, but some of them ended up actually going to be the Phoenicians.
Gotcha.
Eventually, I think.
No, you're right.
Like
I think you're right.
But I know for sure that the Philistines were mentioned in the Egyptian record of
mm-hmm.
the invasion of the Sea Peoples under Ramses II.
Because they actually repelled the Sea People invasion.
Yes, the Egyptians were like the only one to not fall, but that's also because they were the only ones they were way more stable than their neighbors.
They had been stable because
their neighbors were
existed for thousands of years.
Were like super destabilized when they got huge waves of immigrants.
Yeah,
and then those immigrants were followed by raiders.
Yeah.
Collectively, all of them, the immigrants and the raiders, are called the Sea Peoples.
Dude, you gotta read Evolution of Civilizations. You'd love it because it talks about all that stuff. I have the book here. You can take it with you if you want. Maybe.
I hate
you know what? You always take my book and you forget. You only returned my book today after like 2 months.
Look, all right, I'm a busy man.
Okay. Anyway, just to summarize, because we kind of went into a different topic. What I'm getting at is racism is never morally justified, but I understand racism when it's transparent and they don't try to pretend beat around the bush. Israel does not, like, Netanyahu's a pretty evil guy, but he's like honest about being an evil guy, right?
That's fair.
Israel is racist to a certain degree. I'm not saying individual Israelis are racist,
mm-hmm.
but I'm saying the fundamental principles of the backing of their state are racist.
Yes.
And I'm sure the Palestinians are racist too. I'm sure the Palestinians, most of them are probably anti-Semitic.
Yeah, they probably don't. They don't want Jews.
And they have reasons for being anti-Semitic.
They do have reasons.
Yeah.
For being
So like
anti-Semitic.
the point.
The same way that the Jews have reasons for being
Islamophobic or whatever.
Not even. No, I wouldn't even. There's.
Yeah, that's not the right word for it.
Well, there's no term for when you. They're Jewish supremacists.
Yeah, they're Zionists is what
they're
call
Zionists.
Them. Yeah,
they're Zionists, right? There's a reason for that.
Yeah, everyone has a reason, and when we just try to make things black and white and just say this person's evil, that person's not, then you lose the argument. The only thing you can argue is intentions, justifications, the ideas behind things. That's all we can really talk about.
I would love to argue, or not even argue, but I would love to discuss get into ethics and meta-ethics.
Okay, I gotta look into that more.
Another time.
Sure.
Because you can break down a lot of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And how when you get to the root of things,
mm-hmm.
this is my perspective from my analysis.
Yeah.
Of thinking about all these many questions. Like, ethics tends to like completely break down.
Yeah.
As soon as you leave a frame of reference,
mm-hmm.
a context,
yeah,
ethics breaks down.
Well, it's like consequentialism versus deontology.
Yeah.
Or utilitarianism versus deontology.
Yeah.
It's like deontology is like a certain act is either good or bad. There's no in between. Like, you can never lie, even if it's for a good intention. Whereas consequentialism, the consequence of the action matters. But then it's like, well, I don't know what the consequence is going to be all the time.
You don't always know the consequence. Mm-hmm. You don't always. But then even those break down.
Yeah. Well, it's it all comes down to like it's like the Nazi officer looking for the Jewish girl in your basement. He asked, "Do you have a Jewish girl in your basement?
So
are you gonna lie?
You gonna lie?
Is lying wrong?
If lying is if you're Christian,
yeah,
lying is wrong.
Yeah, but if you look at the Bible, there's like specific parts of the Bible that will justify bending the rules.
Well, the Bible,
they say thou shalt not kill.
The Bible breaks every rule they make. I'm gonna just straight up. The Old Testament breaks almost every single.
That is true, but the example you made is not a good representation of.
There's always a context for it.
Sure.
That's the other thing about the Old Testament, because the New Testament's different. It's kind of a retconning of things.
It's a Greek interpretation of Semitic religious philosophy.
That's a pretty good way to put it.
Thank you.
Actually. That's pretty good. Yeah.
Thank you.
But the Old Testament makes a shit ton of rules. Mm-hmm. They break almost every one at some point, but there's always a reason that you do that.
Yeah.
Typically, it comes to either because you're doing the wrong thing, or because God told you to do it.
Right.
It's like that's like a generalization. There's
sure.
a lot of other context, but
just to break it down, everything's very nuanced.
Yeah.
The only way that evil really happens is through ignorance. If we come together. If the enemies, if we come down and we sit with our enemies and we talk to each other, and it's only ignorance, because if your enemy isn't ignorant, you'll oftentimes find common ground. Even if they are ignorant, a lot of times you'll find common ground. Things like music have been a really good way of unifying different peoples. Elvis Presley, black and white people coming together and listening to Elvis Presley.
So, I think, by and large, you are correct.
Mm-hmm.
that negotiation, which is essentially what you're talking about, like
Yeah.
negotiating is like the preferred route, but you have instances when negotiation is impossible.
Yeah, and that's when you fight.
It's very few.
Yeah.
Very few.
But you always try to negotiate first. But that's still ignorance. That's when negotiation doesn't work. It's because of ignorance. It's ignorance from someone.
Or stubbornness.
That's an aspect of ignorance.
I don't think Hitler was particularly ignorant.
No.
Unless you'd argue he's ignorant at the fact that the Jews aren't conspiring against them.
All right, so he was ignorant in that. He was ignorant in that sense. Now let's see. All right, so that's a good point. Sometimes you just do things out of your own interest, and you just want to be powerful.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll concede that.
Pure self-interest.
Yeah, I'll concede that.
But you could argue because Hitler was he was an ideologue.
Yeah.
He was very ideologue. Like what he was doing wasn't.
That's a form of ignorance, though, because there's no nuance.
I was about to get to that, right? So you have blindness.
Yeah.
You're ignorance. You're blind.
Yeah.
And then there is willful blindness.
Yeah.
If I take off my glasses,
Uh-huh.
I'm slightly blind.
Yeah.
There's nothing I can do about that. Except put on glasses or have someone tell me that what I'm seeing is inaccurate.
Yeah.
But if I just cover my fucking eyes and say that the screen is blue, and you tell me I'm wrong, and I say, shut up, you don't know anything. That's willful blindness. That isn't being an ideologue.
Right.
It's a very weird way to explain it. But
well, here's another. There's so many layers to that, though. Because then here's a layer. What if you know what you're saying is wrong, but you're just lying about it on purpose? Then what does that make you? Like what if, take Hitler and Christianity. He used Christianity to support his policies when it mattered, but he never was Christian.
Well, then you get. So, there is a.
Or like an ESG.
Field of thought. I believe it's called realism.
Okay.
I could be wrong on the name of that. I believe it's called realism.
We'll have to look it up. Realism.
Here, look it up really quickly, and I'm gonna talk to make sure. See if I'm.
Joe Rogan moment. Look it up.
No, it's not realism.
Okay. We can look. Dude, we have a lot of time. We'll hopefully not die tomorrow. We might die today, and we have no control over that. But hopefully we'll live for another time, for another podcast. It's almost 3 hours. We should probably.
That's true.
Call it.
This might be the final note. So realism is. It's not realism, obviously, but it's similar.
Dude, look at the lighting. Okay, that's how long we've been talking. The lighting is slowly.
It's dark out. This is what happens if you invite me over, man. I'm gonna talk.
Well,
I love to listen and I love to talk. So, this concept essentially it gamifies geopolitics.
Okay.
It's a philosophy surrounding specifically politics.
Okay.
And it gamifies it.
Yeah.
So it does not view. It does not view strategic or I don't know if gamifies it. That's the term I use for it. But it does not use morals as a means of analyzing any geopolitical. It's
like power politics.
It's power politics in a sense.
Oh, it's like real politic. In Germany, Otto von Bismarck. It was called real politic.
Yes. That's what Bismarck would call it. It's that's not what I'm thinking of.
But it's like that.
But it's similar to that. It's
like using whatever ideologue necessary to win.
Yes, I'd have to look it up on my phone because I watched like a fucking 3-hour breakdown. The guy was criticizing it, but essentially it's the
pragmatism. Oh look, realism.
Realism.
It was what it was. It just we looked up the wrong realism.
Google gave us the wrong answer.
It's realism.
International.
In parentheses, international relations.
I was right.
Look, and it's the same thing as real politics.
There you go. So realism. I would call it gamify. So when I say gamify, what I mean is it turns geopolitics into a competition between multiple parties with an end goal.
It's very Machiavellian.
Yeah. Machiavellian is a good point.
Who's that?
You can't see. Go fuck yourself.
Hey, don't say that to the viewers. If anyone listened this long.
If anyone even gets this far. I'm impressed if you get this far.
I always say that at the end of my videos.
I'm impressed, man. How do you
I always say that because I hope that someone sees this and they get all happy. Yeah,
you're all happy.
End.
Anyway.
What kind of weirdo listens to us all the way? I'm just kidding.
I've managed to listen to your podcast all the way before. So.
Oh, what do you mean by
someone
that?
like myself?
Call me a weirdo?
Oh,
you're calling yourself a weirdo?
Both of us. For doing not only for doing this, but also for me being even willing to listen to this long.
Yeah.
Now, realism, right? So
parentheses, international relations.
It gamifies geopolitics. It turns geopolitics into a series of strategic moves that you can measure their value or like success, to whether it was good or not, based on how it affects your. Typically, it's around your sphere of influence or your overall standing, your power
in general.
It's like power politics or real politics.
Real politique. Wait, that was a French accent. Real politique. Is that more German?
That was a little bit more German.
All right. Does that sound like Otto von Bismarck? I'm Otto von Bismarck.
Do we even know what he sounded like?
Do we have audio? When were audio recordings first created? When was the first? The first picture was like in 1840s.
Audio was like end of the 1800s. I only know this.
Oh, 1860. So he could have been.
I only know this because there is a recording out there somewhere on the internet of the original Civil War army like chant, like call.
Yeah.
Like the weird like war call they would make.
The bugle shit?
No. Like
sorry.
Voices.
Yeah, no, I
knew this really weird kid with a mullet in high school.
I don't know if you guys can hear. It sounds like one of those EVP tapes, you know, like in Ghost Hunters. Did I sound like him or not?
A little bit?
No, I didn't. It's okay. Whatever. Go on.
No, I don't know. I don't remember what you said.
Weird kid. Something about a weird kid.
Yeah, but he made that. He like knew what it sounded like.
Yeah.
I don't know where this clip of. It was like the last Civil War Southern veteran.
Oh, I saw. Oh, wait, this is different. But I saw a interview between I think it was between a Confederate veteran and a Union veteran, and they were just talking about the war.
That's interesting.
I should probably find it. Let's see. Civil War soldiers convo.
Yeah, we're ending up reaction.
Yeah, look, see, Civil War veterans talking and telling stories. 1930. There was That's crazy. There was Civil War. I mean, it makes sense, but it's like you never would have. Oh, these guys. That's the one I was thinking of.
Yeah. Well, you have to think that the Civil War was in what, like 1840, 1850.
Yeah. Wait, what? What was?
Civil War.
1861 to 1865.
Yeah, it was even later than I thought.
The War of Rebellion. If you're a Yankee and if you're a Confederate, it's the War of Northern Aggression.
I fucking love how that perspective just.
Yeah, it's either the War of the Rebellion or it's the War of Northern Aggression.
That is.
These daggone Northerners want to tell me I don't have the freedom to hold slaves. What, he thinks they're humans or something? These crazy Yankees with all their moral obligations.
All right. I think this might be enough for the day.
Yeah. Well, I think we should wrap it up anyway.
We should.
It's almost 3 hours.
Is this the longest one you've done?
Longest podcast, yeah. Because our live stream was the longest video I've done. Yeah, you little taka, you little jabba.
I'm warning you, it only gets longer.
Oh.
Whoa,
what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? I need sleep.
I need sleep. I've been up since 2:30.
Yeah. All right. We spent we were gonna summarize it and we ended up talking about Israel and Palestine. Wait. All right. Let me just conclude this with saying: escape the matrix, question everything you're ever taught.
Do your own research.
Yeah, because escaping.
Listen to other people.
Yeah.
But trust but verify.
Yes.
Trust but verify.
Here's the thing: escaping the matrix doesn't mean specifically believing in a specific political ideology. All it means is freeing your mind from the constraints of just believing in a specific set of beliefs.
Just believing what you are told and what you are shown.
Yeah.
Through the majority of things. Not
even the majority, because you can be a bot by being look at the far right conspiracy theorists. They are also NPCs. They're just NPCs against the system.
Yeah.
You can be an NPC for the system or against the system.
It's like, did you see the super fucking emo kids or the alt kids in school?
Yeah.
And because the way I looked at them is I was like, you guys are just playing into the system from another direction.
Yeah.
But you're not actually, you're not rebelling against anything
meaningful. It's like anti-social social club.
You're not rebelling against anything meaningful. All you're doing is
contributing in your own way.
Is your what?
You're contributing in your own way.
Yeah, you're just adding a subculture. Back into, you're just adding another subculture.
Well, it's like the person that says that they don't care what you think. That's what they care. They want you to think of you as the person who doesn't care what they think. You know,
it's not always the case.
Yeah, okay, but most of the time, if someone has to say, I don't care what you think, come on.
Yeah.
If you really don't care what people think, like, you're not gonna say it. Anyway, by the way, I love your thoughts. Yeah, I totally care what you think. Just kidding. Obviously, I care what you think. You're a smart guy. I like talking to you.
I hope you care enough to invite
Wholesome
me.
moment.
Wholesome moment.
Wholesome moment.
Wholesome moment. Wholesome moment.
Hey, you have a weapon in your hand, huh?
You have a weapon in your hand?
The escalation of violence.
You know, what's interesting is that's also by like putting up your hands.
Yeah, to
It's
show
just
you have
a
no weapons.
passive movement, but that's but
It's
then
evolutionary.
You
now
flip
it's
that,
like,
you have your hands covered,
yeah,
and then you're covering any surface area or area at all, because that like instinctually. See, I just ignored the fuck out of him. This instinctually triggers your brain to think of controlling more space.
Yeah.
And thus, you would view someone else as more aggressive when they do that.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Based.
Little body language.
Little based language.
Little base body language.
Yeah. Anyway, to clarify, escape the matrix. Take a real red pill. A red pill does not mean becoming rich and trying to sleep with lots of women. That's not being red pilled. Red pilled is just a mindset of like, I'm not just going to accept this potentially illusory reality that's provided to me. That's all that it means. So let's reclaim words like the red pill. Let's reclaim words like woke. Woke used to be a cool word. Let's reclaim, escaping the matrix. And most of all, let's reclaim the word Kentucky Fried Chicken. That used to mean something back in my day.
That used to mean something?
Kentucky Fried Chicken used to be a fine establishment. That Southern blend, that good old Colonel Sanders made.
I think I've been to KFC maybe 5 times in my life.
Yeah, well, if we can reclaim KFC, everyone's gonna go there.
And mandatory?
Yeah, Mando. Hey, make me president of the United States, and I'm gonna eliminate every single other fast food joint. We're only gonna have KFCs. Only KFCs. Colonel Sanders, that's my religion. Good old Colonel Sanders looking down on us, looking at a spice our chicken.
You have to worship your deep fryer 5 times a day.
Colonel Sanders.
You have to pray in the direction of Kentucky.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Anyway, all right, can we end?
Yeah, that's where we're done. I'm done, man. I'm just.
All right. This is Jared Stewart.
I'm just talking shit.
This is Jared Stewart. I'm Patrick Hamilton. Hopefully, you want to do more podcasts?
No, I'll come back on.
All right,
this
good.
Is fun.
Well, then he'll be back on again, and we do live streams. So
yeah, we do live streams.
Yeah. Well, this is the Warrior Philosopher. Building the foundation. We can do it at the same time. 3, 2, 1. Building the foundations of the Warrior Philosophy. I'll see you next time. Peace out.